Well, what do you think? The Dean of the Foreign Examinations Syndicate addressed his question directly to Cedric Voss, the chairman of the History Committee. No, Dean. I think the Secretary should be first to have his say. After all, it's the permanent staff who'll have to work with whoever we appoint. The Dean turned to the person sitting on his immediate left, a twinkling man in his middle 50s, who blinked boyishly behind his rimless spectacles. Well, Dr. Bartlett, let's hear what you've got to say. Bartlett, permanent secretary of the Foreign Examinations Syndicate, glanced good-naturedly round the tables before looking down briefly at his neatly written notes. Duckham. Just a little vague, I thought. Nice chap and all that, but I wonder if he's got quite the snap and zip that I'd welcome. He's third in my book. Then there's Quinn. I liked him. Honest, intelligent fellow, firm views, clear brain, but I think his, handicap may be a bit too much of a liability here. Anyway, I'd put him second. That leaves Fielding, and he's the man I'd go for every time. Damn good schoolmaster, excellent results from his pupils, references quite outstanding. He's my first choice, Dean, without the slightest doubt. Including the Dean himself, the full complement of syndics was present. 12 of them, each a prominent fellow of his or her college within the University of Oxford, and each called upon to attend the meetings held twice a term at the syndicate building for the purpose of formulating official examination policy. None of them was on the permanent staff of the syndicate, and none was paid a penny, apart from travelling expenses, for attendance at these meetings. Yet most of them took an active part on the various subject committees, were happy to adopt a policy of enlightened self-interest towards the profitable procedures of public examinations, and during the months of June and July, after their own undergraduates had departed for the long vac, acted as chief examiners and moderators in the GCE ordinary and advanced level examinations. In that case, the Dean said, there's only the matter of his starting salary to settle. Let's see, he's 34. Could I just make one point before you go on, Dean? It was one of the younger dons, the one with the beard, a chemist from Christchurch. Yes, of course, Mr. Roop. If I may say so, I think you're presuming that we all agree with the Secretary's views. But I don't. And I thought the whole purpose of this meeting— Oh, quite so, Mr. Roop. It was just that I thought I sensed a feeling of general agreement. But we're in your hands. Thank you, Dean. I do feel strongly about this, and I just can't agree with the order of merit the Secretary's given. If I'm going to be frank about it, I thought that Fielding was too much of a yes-man. Too much of a smoothie for me. You mean you'd put Quinn first, is that it? I would indeed. He's got sound views on examinations, he's got a good mind. But what's more important, I reckon he's got a genuine streak of integrity. And these days, you didn't feel the same about Fielding? No. The Dean thanked Roop for his views. His eyes swept over the committee, inviting comments. Anyone else wish to, The Vice-Dean, profoundly bored, made his first and final contribution to the day's deliberations. A quick vote, perhaps, Dean? All right, a show of hands, then. All those in favour of appointing Fielding, please. Roop suddenly spoke up again. Just before we vote, Dean, I would like to ask the Secretary for some information. I'm quite sure he'll have it at his fingertips. From behind his spectacles, the Secretary eyed Roop with chill distaste, and several committee members could scarcely conceal their impatience and irritation. He was certainly a brilliant chemist, and his 2 years with the Anglo-Arabian Oil Company had seemed a decided asset in view of the syndicate's commitments. But he was too young, too cocky. This wasn't the first time he'd clashed with the Secretary either. I'm sure the Secretary will be glad to, What were you thinking of, Mr. Roop? I've been looking at the syndicate's constitution, and as it happens, I've got a copy with me here. Oh, God, mumbled the Vice-Dean. In paragraph 23, Dean, and I quote, "The syndicate will undertake to employ a small percentage of persons who are variously handicapped, should the disabilities of such persons prove not substantially to interfere with the proper discharge of the duties entrusted to them." Roop closed the slim document and put it aside. Now, my question is this. Can the Secretary please tell us how many handicapped people are at present employed by the syndicate? The Dean turned once more to the Secretary, whose customary bonhomie had now apparently returned. We used to have a one-eyed fellow in the packing department. In the ensuing laughter, the vice-dean, whose own particular handicap was a weak bladder, shuffled out of the room, where Roop was pursuing his point. "You see, Dean, all I really want to know is this. Do we feel that Mr. Quinn's deafness would be a significant liability in the job? That's all." "Well," replied Bartlett, "there's the telephone for a start, isn't there? It's a very tricky problem when you're deaf." "Oh, surely not. There are all sorts of gadgets these days. You can wear one of those behind-the-ear things, where the microphone is." "Does Mr. Roop actually know someone who's deaf and who—" "As a matter of fact, I don't, but then I suggest he's in real danger of underestimating the sort of problem. Gentlemen, gentlemen." The exchanges were becoming increasingly tetchy, and the Dean intervened. It was becoming obvious that there was a festering, strangely personal antipathy between the two men, and few of the older syndics could understand it. Bartlett was usually a man of wonderfully equable temperament, and he hadn't finished yet. "You all saw the report from the hospital. You all saw the audiographs. The fact of the matter is that Quinn is very deaf, very deaf." "He seemed to be able to hear us perfectly well, didn't he?" Roop said. The Dean turned again to the secretary. You know, it's amazing that he did seem to hear us so well, isn't it?" Mrs. Seth, the chairman of the Science Committee, thought about her father. He had gone deaf very quickly, when he was in his late 40s, and he'd been dismissed from his job. He'd never worked again. Suddenly she was aware that they were voting. 5 hands went up almost immediately for Fielding. "And those for Quinn, please?" 3 hands, including Roop's, were raised, and then a 4th. The Dean began counting from the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, another hand, and the Dean started again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it looks... And then, slowly, Mrs. Seth raised her own hand. 6. "Well, you've made your decision, ladies and gentlemen. Quinn has been appointed. Close vote, 6-5. 10 minutes later, the Dean and the secretary walked side by side down the flight of stairs that led to the ground floor and to Bartlett's office. "Good night," said the Dean. But Bartlett remained darkly silent. Above his door was a twin-coloured light, similar to the sort found in hospitals, which was operated from 2 switches on the desk inside. The first switch turned on a red light, signifying that Bartlett was in session with someone and did not wish to be disturbed. A second switch turned on a green light, indicating that one was free to knock and enter. When no light showed, the room was empty. Since his appointment to the secretaryship, Bartlett had firmly maintained that if anyone wished to discuss a matter of importance with him, he himself should have the courtesy to ensure an uninterrupted confidential chat, and his staff invariably observed that arrangement. Whilst the other 4 took their seats in the upstairs lounge of the Charwell Motel, he walked over to the bar and ordered the drinks. 2 gins and tonics, 2 medium sherries, 1 dry sherry, the latter for himself. He was very fond of dry sherry. "Put them all down to the Foreign Examination Syndicate, will you? And we shall be having lunch." "Have you booked a table, sir?" "Yes, the name's Quinn." He took the drinks over on the tray and sat down with the other members of the History Committee. It was his 3rd revision meeting since joining the syndicate. He sat back in the low leather chair, drained half his sherry at a gulp, and looked out at the busy lunchtime traffic along the A40. This was the life. Jolly good meal to come, wine, coffee, and then back for the afternoon session. Finish, with a bit of luck, about 5, or even earlier. The morning session had been a concentrated, unremitting slog, but they'd done well. Question papers covering the periods from the Crusades to the English Civil War had now assumed the final and definitive form in which they would appear before the following summer's advanced-level history candidates at schools all over the world. Just the 5 papers left, from the Hanoverians to the Treaty of Versailles, and he felt much more at home with the recent periods. "Your menu, sir." Quinn had not heard the man approach, and only when the menu obtruded itself into his field of vision was he aware of the head waiter. Yes, perhaps his deafness would be slightly more of a handicap than he'd sometimes assumed, but he was managing wonderfully well so far. In the restaurant, Quinn seated himself at the left-hand corner of the table, with Cedric Voss immediately to his right, 2 of the others immediately opposite, and the 5th member of the party at the top of the table. It was invariably the best sort of arrangement. Although he could see little of Voss's lips as he was speaking, he was just about near enough to catch his words, and the others he could see quite clearly. Lip-reading had its limitations, of course, but in normal circumstances it was quite wonderful what one could do. Quinn had first attended lip-reading classes 6 years previously, and had been amazed to discover how easy it was. He knew from the outset that he must have been blessed with a rare gift. Indeed, he'd become so proficient that he could sometimes almost believe that he was in fact hearing again. In any case, he hadn't completely lost his hearing. The expensive aid at his right ear, the left was completely nerveless, amplified sufficient sound at reasonably close quarters, and even now he could hear Voss as he pronounced the benediction over the escargot just placed before him. When the coffee finally arrived, Quinn was feeling contented and a little befuddled. In fact, he couldn't quite remember whether it was Richard III on the First Crusade or Richard I on the Third Crusade, or for that matter whether either Richard had been on either crusade. Life was suddenly very good. He thought of Monica. They arrived back at the syndicate building at 20 minutes to 3, and whilst the others were making their leisurely way back to the revision room upstairs, Quinn himself walked quickly along the corridor and gently knocked on the furthest door on the right, where on the nameplate read, Miss M.M. Height. He tentatively opened the door and looked in. No one. But he saw a note prominently displayed beneath a paperweight on the neatly cleared desk, and he stepped inside to read it. Gone to Paolo's, back at 3. Bartlett never minded his staff coming and going just when and how they liked. What he did insist upon, however, was that everyone should keep him informed about exactly where they could be found. So, Monica had gone to have her comely hair coiffed. Never mind. A traveller who visits Oxford today and walks northwards from St. Giles is struck immediately by the large imposing houses mostly dating from the latter half of the 19th century. The Foreign Examinations Syndicate building stands some 20 yards back from the comparatively quiet road which links the busy Banbury and Woodstock thoroughfares, and is sheltered from inquisitive eyes behind a row of tall horse-chestnut trees. It's approached from the front by a curving gravel drive, allowing space sufficient for the parking of a dozen or so vehicles. But the syndicate staff has grown so much of late that the drive has been extended along the left-hand side of the building, leading to a small concreted yard at the rear, where it has become the custom of the graduates themselves to park their cars. There are 5 graduates on the permanent staff of the syndicate, 4 men and 1 woman, severally superintending the fields of study corresponding, in the main, to the disciplines which they had pursued for their university degrees, and to the subjects taught in their subsequent careers. The names of the 5 graduates are printed in bold blue letters at the top of the syndicate's official notepaper, and on such notepaper, in a large room on the first floor, on Friday the 31st of October, the day after Quinn's deliberations with the History Committee, 4 of the 5 young shorthand typists are tapping out letters to the headmasters and mistresses of those overseas schools, a select but growing band, who are happy to entrust the public examination of their O and A-level candidates to the syndicate's benevolence and expertise. The 5th girl, Margaret Freeman, had been reading Woman's Weekly, but now puts it aside and opens her dictation book. Automatically, she reaches for her ruler and neatly crosses through the 3rd name on the headed notepaper. The list reads, T. G. Bartlett, Ph.D., M.A., Secretary, P. Ogleby, M.A., Deputy Secretary, G. Bland, M.A., now erased, Miss M. M. Height, M.A., D. J. Martin, B.A. Beneath the last name, she types N. Quinn, M.A., her new boss. After Margaret Freeman had left him, Quinn opened one of his filing cabinets and took out the drafts of the history question papers, deciding that a further couple of hours could see them ready for the press. All in all, he felt quite pleased with life. It was only the phones that caused him trouble. There were 2 of them in each office, a white one for internal extensions, and a grey one for outside calls. And there they sat, squat and menacing, on the right-hand side of Quinn's desk. But neither rang that morning, and with quiet concentration, Quinn carried through the agreed string of amendments to the history questions. By 1:45 he had finished 4 of the question papers, and was pleasantly surprised to find how quickly the morning had flown by. He locked the papers away. Bartlett, who was a martinet on all aspects of security, and allowed himself to wonder whether Monica would be going for a drink and a sandwich at the Horse and Trumpet. In the lounge bar of the Horse and Trumpet, a tall, lank-haired man pushed his way past the crowded tables and made for the furthest corner. He held a plate of sandwiches in his left hand and a glass of gin and a jug of bitter in his right. He took his seat beside a woman in her mid-30s who sat smoking a cigarette. "Cheers." He lifted his glass and buried his nose in the froth. She sipped the gin and stubbed out her cigarette. "It's got to finish. You know that, don't you?" For the first time she looked directly in his face. "You said you enjoyed it yesterday." His voice was very low. "Of course I bloody well enjoyed it. That's not the point, is it? Couldn't we just... Look, Donald, the answer's no. I've thought about it a lot, and... Well, we've just got to stop, that's all. I'm sorry, but..." It was risky, and above all, she worried about Bartlett finding out, with his Victorian attitudes. They walked back to the office without speaking, but Donald Martin was not quite so heartbroken as he appeared to be. So long as Monica Haight had no other outlet for her sexual frustrations, he was always going to be in with a chance. And once they were in her bungalow together, with the door locked and the curtains drawn, God, what a hot pants she could be. He knew that Quinn had taken her out for a drink once, but he didn't worry about that. Or did he? Philip Ogleby heard Monica go into her office and gave her no second thought today. He occupied the first room on the right-hand side of the corridor, with the secretary's immediately next door, and Monica's next to that at the far end. Ogleby had been with the syndicate for 14 years, and remained as much a mystery to his present colleagues as he had done to his former ones. He was 53 now, a bachelor, with a lean, ascetic face, and a perpetually mournful, weary look upon his features. What was left of his hair was grey, and what was left of his life seemed greyer still. Only one person in Oxford was aware of a different side to his nature. At 3:20, Bartlett rang extension 5. "Is that you, Quinn?" "I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well." "It's Bartlett here." He almost shouted it into the phone. "Oh, sorry. Look, I can't quite hear you, Dr. Bartlett. I'll come along to your office right away." Bartlett put the phone down and sighed heavily. Quinn knocked and entered. "Sit down, Quinn, and let me put you in the picture. When you were at your meeting yesterday, I gave the others some details of our little, jamboree next week." Quinn could follow the words fairly easily. "With the oil sheiks, you mean, sir?" "Yes, it's going to be an important meeting. The syndicate has only just broken even these last few years, and, well, but for these links of ours with some of the new oil states, we'd soon be bankrupt. Now, we've been in touch with our schools out there. As you know, George Bland, your predecessor, is working in Aljamara, and one of the things they'd like us to think about is a new history syllabus. O-level only, for a start. You know the sort of thing: Suez Canal, Lawrence of Arabia, colonialism, cultural heritage, development of resources, that sort of thing. Hell of a sight more relevant than Elizabeth I, eh?" Quinn nodded. "The point is this. I want you to have a think about it before next week. Draft out a few ideas. Nothing too detailed, just the outlines, and let me have them." I'll try, sir. Could you just say one thing again, though? Better than a list of metaphors, did you say?" "Elizabeth I, man, Elizabeth I." "Oh, yes, sorry." Quinn left the room deeply embarrassed. He wished Bartlett would occasionally try to move his lips a little more. When Quinn had gone, the secretary half closed his eyes. He thought of Roop once more. Roop. What a bloody fool that man had been. On the night of Monday the 3rd of November, the 5 emissaries from the Sheikdom of Aljamara were safely settled in the finest rooms that Oxford's Sheridan Hotel had to offer. In the years immediately after the Second World War, oil of high quality and in large deposits had been discovered beneath their seemingly barren sands, and a benevolent and comparatively scrupulous despot, in the person of the uncle of Sheikh Ahmed Dubal, had immeasurably enriched the lives of most of the inhabitants of Aljamara. Roads, hospitals, swimming pools and schools had not only been planned, but built. In such an increasingly westernized society, the great demand of the wealthier citizens was for the better education of their children, and it was now 5 years since the first links with the Foreign Examination Syndicate had been forged by Sheikh Ahmed, the Minister of Education. The two-day conference started at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, the 4th of November. Quinn soon found, to his very great relief, that the Arabs spoke a beautifully precise and fluent brand of English, distinct and, to Quinn, almost childishly comprehensible. In all, the 2 days passed rapidly and delightfully. On Wednesday evening, the Arabs had booked the Disraeli suite at the Sheridan for a farewell party, and all the syndicate's permanent staff, together with wives and sweethearts, and all the syndicate's governing council were invited to the junketing. Sheikh Ahmed himself, resplendent in his robes, took his seat beside a radiant Monica Height, exquisitely dressed in a pale lilac trouser suit, and Donald Martin sat next to his plain-looking little wife, her white skirt creased and her black jumper covered with dandruff. The Sheikh had clearly commandeered the fair Monica for the evening, and was flashing his white and golden smile as he leaned towards her, intimate, confiding. And she was smiling back at him, attentive, flattered, inviting. Quinn noticed them, of course, and as he finished his shrimp cocktail, he watched them more closely. The Sheikh was in full flow, but whether his words were meant for Monica alone, Quinn, lip-reading comfortably, was quite unable to tell. "As one of your own Englishmen told me one day, Miss Height, oysters is amorous, lobsters is lecherous, but shrimps, Christ!" Monica laughed, and said something close beside the Sheikh's ear, which Quinn couldn't follow. Towards midnight, the party had dwindled to about a third of its original number. Philip Ogleby, who had drunk more than anyone, seemed the only obviously sober one amongst them. The Martins had left. Monica and Sheikh Ahmed suddenly reappeared after an unexplained absence of over half an hour. Bartlett was talking rather too loudly. One of the Arabs was in earnest negotiations with one of the barmaids, and of the syndics, only the Dean, Voss, and Roop appeared capable of sustaining the lively pace for very much longer. At midnight, Quinn decided that he must go. He tried to catch Bartlett's eye, but the secretary was deep in conversation with Sheikh Ahmed. And then Ogleby joined them, and then Roop walked over, and Bartlett and Ogleby moved away, and then the Dean and Voss went across, and finally Monica. Quinn watched the changing groupings. He felt a sense of guilt and fascination as he looked at their lips and followed their conversations, as though he was standing almost immediately beside them. He knew that some of the words must have been whispered very quietly, but to him most of them were as clear as if they'd been shouted through a megaphone. He felt suddenly frightened as Bartlett caught his eye and walked over, with Sheikh Ahmed just behind him. "Well, you enjoyed yourself, my boy?" "Yes, indeed. I was just waiting to thank you both." "That is a great pleasure for us, too, Mr. Quinn." Ahmed smiled his white and golden smile and held out his hand. "We shall be meeting you again, we hope so, soon." Quinn walked out into St. Giles. He'd not noticed how keenly one of the remaining guests had been watching him for the past few minutes, and it was with considerable surprise that he felt a hand on his shoulder and turned. "I'd like a word with you, Quinn," said Philip Ogleby. On Friday, the 21st of November, a man in his early 30s caught the train from Paddington back to Oxford. He found an empty first-class compartment. From his briefcase he took out a bulky envelope addressed to himself, "If undelivered, please return to the Foreign Examination Syndicate," and extracted several lengthy reports. He unclipped his ballpoint pen from an inside pocket and began to make notes. At 4 o'clock he put the papers back into their envelope, crossed out his own name, C.A. Roop, and wrote T.G. Bartlett on the cover. Within a few minutes, the drenched grey spires of Oxford came into view on his right, and the train drew into the station. The rain poured down. Charles Noakes, caretaker to the syndicate, was replacing a fluorescent tube in the downstairs corridor when Roop entered the building. "Hello, Noakes. Secretary in?" "No, sir. He's been out all the afternoon." "Oh." Roop knocked on Bartlett's door and looked in. For a brief second he thought he heard a noise inside the room, but there was nothing. Only a note on the desk which read, "Friday p.m. off to Banbury. Maybe back about 5. "Not there, is he, sir?" Noakes had descended the small ladder and was standing outside. "No, but never mind. I'll have a word with one of the others. He knocked and put his head around Ogilby's door. No Ogilby. He tried Martin's room. No Martin. He was knocking quietly on Monica Hyde's door when the caretaker reappeared. Looks as if Mr. Quinn's the only graduate here, sir. His car's still out the back anyway. I think the others must have gone. The caretaker tried Quinn's room, and Roop came up behind him as he looked in. A green anorak was draped over one of the chairs, and the top drawer of the nearest cabinet gaped open to reveal a row of buff-coloured file cases. On the desk, under a paperweight, was a note from Quinn for his typist's attention, but Quinn himself was nowhere to be seen. "Oh, at least he's left a note for us, Noakes. More than some of the others have. Oh, I don't think the secretary'd be very happy about this, though." Noakes gravely closed the top drawer of the cabinet and pushed in the lock. "Bit of a stickler about that sort of thing, isn't he, old Bartlett? Oh, you can't be too careful in a place like this, sir." "No, you're absolutely right." "Mind you, sir, I reckon he might have picked a warmer week for practising the fire drill." "Oh, gives you those, does he?" Roop grinned. "We had one today, sir, 12 o'clock. He had us all there standing in the cold for something like quarter of an hour." "Quarter of an hour in this weather? Why as long as that?" "Well, there's quite a lot of permanent staff now, and we had to tick our names off of a list, and the secretary gave us a little talk." But Roop was no longer listening. He began walking slowly up the corridor. "Are you sure I can't help you?" Noakes asked. No, doesn't matter. I only came to give this envelope to Dr. Bartlett. I'll leave it on his desk." "I'm going upstairs for a cup of tea in a minute, sir, when I fix this light. Would you like one?" "No, I've got to be off. Thanks all the same." Bartlett himself had been addressing a group of Banbury headmasters and headmistresses on the changing pattern of public examinations. He was driving his pride and joy, a dark brown Vandenpla, at a steady 60 down the 20-odd-mile stretch to Oxford. He lived out at Whately on the western side of the city, and as he drove he debated whether to call in at the office or to go straight home. But at Kidlington he found himself beginning to get caught up in the regular evening paralysis, and decided to turn off right along the ring road towards the city centre. He would call in the office a bit later, perhaps, when the evening rush hour had abated. On Saturday, the 22nd of November, the burglar alarm system was switched off at 8:30 a.m., 1 hour later than on weekdays. During the winter months, there were only occasional Saturday workings, and on this particular morning the building was, from all appearances, utterly deserted. Ogilby was on foot, and let himself in quietly. Successively he looked into each room on the ground floor in order to satisfy himself that no one was around. He went into his own room and rang a number. "Morning, Secretary. I hope I didn't get you out of bed." "No?" "Ah, good. Can you remind me when the alarms turned off on Saturday mornings? I've got to... 8:30. "Yes, I thought so, but I just wanted to make sure. I didn't want... "No. Funny, really. I'd somehow got it into my head that there'd been some change." "No, I see. Well, sorry to trouble you." Ogilby walked into Bartlett's room. He looked around quickly and then took out his keys. Whately was at least 20 minutes' drive away. He could probably allow himself at least half an hour. But Ogilby was a cautious soul, and he allowed himself only 20 minutes. Chief Inspector Morse, of the Thames Valley Police, was never happy when his hair began to grow in untidy curly profusion just above his collar, and he wondered sadly why it now failed to sustain such luxuriance upon the top of his head. He tipped the barber generously and walked out into Summertown. Although not so cold as in recent days, it was drizzling slightly, and he decided to wait for a bus up to his bachelor flat at the top of North Oxford. It was 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday, the 24th of November. He had just got home when the phone rang. He swore savagely. "Hoped I might find you at home, sir. I couldn't find anyone who'd seen you at the office." "So what? I've had a haircut, not a crime, is it?" "Can you, get down here straight away, sir?" Sergeant Lewis's tone was suddenly grave. "What's up?" "We've got a body, sir." Several faces peeped from behind ground-floor lace-curtained windows as the police car drove into Pinewood Close, a small, undistinguished crescent of 8 semi-detached houses, erected some 50 years previously. It was at the house at the extreme left that the bulky figure of Constable Dixon stood, stamping his feet on the damp concrete in front of a prefabricated, unpainted garage, and talking to a woman in her early 50s. Dixon stepped forward to greet the Chief Inspector. "This is Mrs. Jardine, sir. She owns the property, and she's the one who let us in." Morse nodded a friendly greeting, took the Yale key from Dixon, and instructed him to take Mrs. Jardine to the police car and get a statement from her. He himself stood for a while in silence, with his back to the house, and looked around him. The gutter was full of sopping brown leaves, and the lamp-post immediately outside number 1 had been vandalized. Morse turned round to survey the garage, contenting himself with a quick glance through the glass panels at the top of the nearer door. Inside, he saw a dark blue Morris 1300. The front door of number 1, Pinewood Close, opened onto a narrow hallway. The staircase climbed the wall to the left. Morse stood inside and pointed to the door immediately to his right. "This the one?" "Next one, sir." The door was closed, and Morse took out his pen and depressed the handle carefully. Inside the room, the electric light was still turned on. The dull orange curtains were drawn. The gas fire was burning low, and lying in a fetal posture on the carpet was the body of a young man. The fire was flanked by 2 old but comfortable-looking armchairs, and beside the one to the right, on a low French-polished coffee table, stood a bottle of dry sherry, almost full, and a cheap-looking sherry glass, almost empty. Morse bent forward and sniffed the pale, clear liquid. "Did you know, Lewis, that about 18% of men and about 4% of women can't smell cyanide?" "It is poison, then?" "Smells like it. Peach blossom, bitter almonds, take your pick." The dead man's face was turned towards them, away from the fire, and Morse knelt down and looked at it. A small quantity of dry froth crusted the twisted mouth, and the bearded jaw was tightly clenched in death. The pupils of the open eyes appeared widely dilated, and the skin of the face was a morbid, blotchy blue. "All the classic symptoms, Lewis. We hardly need a post-mortem on this one. Hydrocyanic acid. Anyway, the Path boys should be here any minute." He stood up and walked over to the curtains, which had obviously shrunk in a not particularly recent wash, and which gaped open slightly towards the top. Outside, Morse could see a narrow garden. He turned his attention back to the room itself. Along the wall opposite the fire were a dozen or so bundles of books, neatly tied with stout cord, and a dark mahogany sideboard. A small waste-paper basket stood in the shallow alcove to the left of the fire, and inside the basket was a ball of paper, which Morse picked out and smoothed gently on top of the sideboard. "Mr. Quinn. I can't do all the cleaning this afternoon because Mr. Evans is off sick, so I'll call back and finish just after 6 if that's convenient. A. Evans, Mrs." "You say he just has these downstairs rooms?" "So Mrs. Jardine says, sir. There's a young couple living upstairs usually, but she's in the John Radcliffe having a baby, and he works nights at Cowley, and he's been staying with his parents in Oxford somewhere." The front doorbell rang, and Morse sent Lewis to answer it. "Tell them they can start as soon as they like." He walked out of the room and through into the kitchen at the back of the house. On a red formica-topped table stood a stack of recently purchased provisions. 1/2 dozen eggs in their plastic container, 1/2 pound of butter, 1/2 pound English cheddar, 2 generous slices of prime steak under a cellophane wrapper, and a brown paper bag full of mushrooms. Beside the groceries was a curling payout slip from the Quality supermarket. "Lewis!" Lewis, who had been chatting to the police surgeon, appeared at the door. "Sir?" "I want you to make a complete inventory of the food in the fridge and in this larder here. I'm going back to the station. You stay here until I get back." Morse read the statement aloud to the youngish man seated at the small table in interview room number 1. "I've known Nicholas Quinn for 3 months. He came to work at the Foreign Examination Syndicate on the 1st of September this year. On Monday the 24th of November he did not appear at the office and did not ring in to say that anything was wrong. None of my colleagues saw Mr. Quinn on Monday, and no one knew where he was. This morning, Tuesday the 25th of November, Dr. Bartlett asked me to drive around to Mr. Quinn's house, and I did so, arriving at about 9:30 a.m. The front door was locked, and no one answered the doorbell. I could see that Mr. Quinn's car was still in the garage, so I proceeded to the back of the house. The light was on in the ground floor room, and the curtains were drawn, but there was a gap in the curtains, and I looked inside. I could see someone lying on the floor in front of the fireplace, and I knew that something was seriously wrong. I therefore rang the police immediately from the public call box in the main street, and was told to wait at the house until the police came. Donald Martin signed the statement with a nervy flourish. "How well did you know Mr. Quinn, sir?" "Not very well, really. He's only been with us." "So you say in your statement, but why did the secretary send you, not one of the others?" "I don't know. I suppose I knew him as well as any of us." Morse nodded. "I see. Do you happen to know where his parents live?" "Somewhere in Yorkshire, I think. But the office could—" "Of course. Did he have a girlfriend?" "Not that I know of." At 12 noon, on Tuesday the 25th of November, in an air-conditioned European-style classroom in the Sheikhdom of Aljamara, a young Englishman who was invigilating his first examination gave the order to stop writing. There were only 5 pupils in the room, all Arabs, all of whom had finished writing several minutes previously. One of the boys, not a pupil of the school, but the son of one of the sheiks, had in fact finished his work some considerable time earlier, and had been sitting back in his chair, arms folded, an arrogant, self-satisfied smirk upon his dark features. When the boys had left, the young Englishman filled in the invigilation form with great care, and prepared to place the attendance sheet, together with the scripts, in the official buff-coloured envelope. As he did so, his eyes fell momentarily upon the work of Mohammed Dubal, index number 5, and he saw immediately that it was very good. Infinitely better than that of the other 4, but then the sheik's son had doubtless had the privilege of high-class private tuition. Ah, well, there would be plenty of opportunity for him to try to jack up the standards of his own pupils a bit before next summer. It was just after noon that Morse returned to Pinewood Close. He threaded his way past the 3 police cars, past the ambulance, and entered the house once more. "How long's he been dead?" "Dunno," mumbled the aging police surgeon. "Could be 4, 5 days. Not less than 3, I shouldn't think." "Not much help, are you?" "No, I shall have to take a closer look at him. I'll have a guess. Friday night or Saturday morning?" "Cyanide?" "Cyanide." Morse turned to the other 2 men in the room who had been brushing the likeliest-looking surfaces with powder. "Anything much?" "Seems like his prints all over the place, sir." "Hardly surprising." "Somebody else's, though." "McLeaner's, most likely." Just as he was about to leave, Morse noticed the green anorak on one of the clothes pegs in the narrow hallway. "You know that he was deaf, don't you, Inspector?" "Deaf? Oh, yes." The police surgeon had mentioned it. "We were all very impressed by the way he coped with his disability." "How deaf was he?" "He would probably have gone completely deaf in a few years' time. That was the prognosis, anyway." For the first time since Bartlett had been talking, the merest flicker of interest showed itself in Morse's eyes. "Little surprising you appointed him, perhaps, sir." "Apart from dealing with the phone, which was a problem, he was quite remarkable. He really was." "Did you appoint him, because he was deaf?" "Oh, no. It seemed to the committee that he was the best man in the field." "Which committee was that?" "We, had all 12 syndics on that committee, plus myself, of course." "Syndics?" "They're like governors of a school, really." "Oh, they don't work here?" "Oh, good gracious, no. They're all university dons. They just meet here twice a term to see if we're doing our job properly." "Have you got their names here?" Morse looked with interest down the typed list that Bartlett handed to him. Printed beside the name of each of the syndics were full details of university, college, degrees, doctorates, and other academic honours. "Most of them Oxford men, I see, sir." "Natural enough, isn't it?" "Just 1 or 2 from Cambridge." "Yes." "Wasn't Quinn at Magdalen College, Cambridge?" Bartlett immediately confirmed the fact. "I see that Mr. Roop was at the same college, sir." "Was he? I'd never noticed that before." "You notice most things, if I may say so." "I always associate Roop with Christchurch, I suppose. He's been appointed a fellow there." "What's Roop's subject?" "He's a chemist." "How old is he?" "Oh, youngish, 30 or so. About Quinn's age, then? Yeah, about that. Now, sir, just one more thing. When did you last see Quinn? Can you remember? Oh, last Friday sometime. I certainly saw him late on Friday evening, but I can't be sure about Friday afternoon. I had to go to a meeting in Banbury at 3 o'clock, and I'm just not sure if I saw him before I went. What time did you leave the office, sir? About 2:15. Morse decided it was high time he saw Miss Monica Height. But before he did so, he had a very much more urgent call to pay. Where's the nearest gents? I'm dying for... there's one right here, Inspector. He got up and opened the door to the right of his desk. Inside was a tiny lavatory with a small wash basin tucked away behind the door. After only a few minutes with Monica Height, Morse found himself wondering how the rest of the staff could ever manage to keep their hands off her, and suspected that perhaps they couldn't. The bright green flower-patterned dress she wore was stretched too tightly across her wide thighs. It somehow managed to mould itself softly and suggestively around her full breasts. Biddable, by the look of it, and eminently beddable. "Do you mind if I just ring my daughter, Inspector? I'm usually on my way home by this time, and she'll probably wonder where I've got to." Morse listened as she rang a number and explained her whereabouts. "How old is your daughter, Miss Height?" She smiled. "It's all right, Inspector. I'm divorced, and Sally's 16. "You must have married young." 18, Inspector. "I'm sure you had much more sense than that." "Me? I'm not married myself." Their eyes met for a brief second, and Morse sensed he could be living dangerously. "When did you last see Mr. Quinn?" She'd seen him on Friday morning, quite sure of that, but Friday afternoon? She couldn't quite remember. It was difficult. After all, Friday was, 5 days ago now. "Did you like Mr. Quinn?" "I hadn't known him all that long, of course, but I liked him, yes. Very nice sort of person." "Did he ever ask you out?" "He asked me out to the pub once or twice at lunch times." "And you went?" "Why not?" "What did he drink?" "Sherry, I think." "Where did you go?" "The Horse and Trumpet, just at the end of the road. Nice, cosy little place. You'd love it." Again their eyes met. Morse stood up. "I'm sorry to have kept you so long, Miss Height. I hope you'll apologize for me to your daughter." "Oh, she'll be all right. She's been at home a lot of the time recently. She's retaking a few O-levels, and the school lets her go home when she hasn't got an examination." "I see." Sergeant Lewis had liked Ogleby, but had learned little from him. He'd remember seeing Quinn the previous Friday morning, but not in the early afternoon, and to each of Lewis's other questions he'd appeared to answer frankly, if uninformatively. Donald Martin had said he couldn't really remember seeing Quinn at all on Friday. Morse gathered from Bartlett that it would be perfectly in order for himself and Lewis to stay in the building. The caretaker would be on the premises until at least 7:30, and the building would be kept open for them as long as they wished. But before handing over the keys to Quinn's office and to his filing cabinets, Bartlett gave the policemen a little lecture on the strictly confidential nature of most of the material they would find. It was of the greatest importance, therefore, that they should remember— Yes. Morse realized how he would have hated working under Bartlett. A man for whom the sin against the Holy Ghost was clearly that of leaving filing cabinets unlocked whilst nipping out to pee. Quinn's office was large and well furnished. Lining 2 complete walls right up to the ceiling were row upon row of history texts and editions of the English classics. 3 dark green filing cabinets stood along the 3rd wall, whilst the 4th carried a large plywood notice board, and one above the other reproductions of Atkinson Grimshaw's paintings of the docks at Hull and Liverpool. Morse seated himself at Quinn's desk. To his right, on the small black-topped table, stood 2 telephones, one white, one grey. "You go through the cabinets, Lewis. I'll try the drawers here." By 7 o'clock, Lewis had looked through the contents of 2 of the 3 cabinets, and now inserted the key into the 3rd, whence he took a further armful of thick folders and once again sat down to his task. The first file contained many carbons of letters stretching back over 2 years, all marked GB/MF, and the replies from various members of the syndicate's English committee, all beginning, "Dear George." This must be the fella Quinn took over from, sir. Bland, wasn't it? Morse nodded cursorily, and resumed his study of a black Let's desk diary, which was the only object of even minimal interest he'd so far unearthed. What's AED stand for, Lewis? Dunno, sir. Well, have a guess. Association of Eccentric Dentists? Morse grinned and shut the diary. You nearly finished? 2 more drawers. Think it's worth it? Might as well go through with it now, sir. As Lewis was about to jam the latest batch of files back into its cabinet, he caught sight of an envelope, which had become wedged beneath the movable slide designed to keep the file cases upright. He worked it out and took the single sheet of paper from the envelope. "Oh, I can tell you what AED stands for, sir." Morse looked up without enthusiasm and took the letter from him. It was typed on the headed notepaper of the Aljamara Education Department and dated 3rd of March. Dear George, greetings to all at Oxford. Many thanks for your letter and for the summer examination package. All entry forms and fee forms should be ready for final dispatch to the syndicate by Friday the 20th, or at the very latest, I am told, by the 21st. Admin has improved here, though there's room for improvement still. Just give us all 2 or 3 more years and we'll really show you. Please don't let these wretched 16-plus proposals destroy your basic O and A pattern. Certainly this sort of change, if implemented immediately, would bring chaos. Yours sincerely. Apart from the illegibly scrawled signature, that was all. Morse frowned slightly as he looked at the envelope, which was addressed to G. Bland, Esquire, M.A., and marked strictly private and confidential in bold red capitals. But his face quickly cleared, and he handed the letter back to Lewis without a word. It really was time they went. Idly he opened the Let's diary again, and his eyes fell upon the calendar inside the front page. What's the date of the postmark on that envelope, Lewis? 3rd of March. This year? Lewis looked again. Yes, sir. Well. What is it? Funny, wouldn't you say, Lewis? Friday the 20th, it says in the letter, but which Friday the 20th? He looked down at the calendar again. Not March. Not April. Not May. Not June. Not July. And it must refer to entry forms for last summer's examinations. Somebody could have made a mistake over the dates, sir. Could have been using last year's. But Morse wasn't listening. He picked up the letter again and studied it for several minutes with a fierce intensity. Then he nodded slowly to himself, and a quiet smile spread over his face. Lewis, my boy, you've done it again. I have, sir. I'm not saying we're much nearer to finding out the identity of the person who murdered Nicholas Quinn, mind you, but I'll tell you one thing. I'm beginning to think we've got a pretty good idea why he was murdered. Well, hadn't you better explain, sir? Look at the letter again, Lewis. Lewis studied the letter once more, and his eyes gradually widened. You're a clever old bugger, sir. Sometimes, perhaps, conceded Morse. What's going on, sir? I reckon somebody has been trafficking illegally in an extremely valuable commodity. Drugs, sir. Exam papers. Would suggest a period of between 72 and 120 hours before the body was discovered. Any greater precision about these time limits is precluded in this case, as in all cases you ever have, muttered Morse, casting aside the pathologist's report. He had never ceased to wonder why, with the staggering advances in medical science, all pronouncements concerning times of death remained so disconcertingly vague. For that was the real question. When had Quinn died? If Aristotle could be believed, why not? The truth would probably lie somewhere in the middle. 94 hours, say. That meant Friday lunchtime or thereabouts. Was that possible? Margaret Freeman was unmarried, a slim, rather plain girl with droopy eyelashes. She had been confidential secretary to Mr. Bland, and had been asked to transfer her allegiance to Mr. Quinn. She had certainly seen Quinn on Friday morning. He'd dictated a whole sheaf of letters to her at about 10:45, and these had kept her busy until fairly late that same afternoon, when she had taken them into Quinn's office and put them in the in-tray. She hadn't seen him that Friday afternoon, yet she'd had the feeling that he was about somewhere, as she could almost positively recall that Quinn's green anorak had been draped over the back of one of the chairs. And yes, there had been a little note for her, with her initials on it, M.F. And then the brief message, just something about going out, she thought, about being back soon, perhaps. But she couldn't really remember. Morse had interviewed her in Quinn's office, and after she had gone, he lit a cigarette and considered things anew. Why wasn't the note still there? Quinn must have come back, crumpled up the note. But the waste paper basket was empty. Cleaners. But Quinn had been alive at about 11 or 11:15 that Friday morning. That was something to build on anyway. To Lewis was entrusted the task of discovering what happened to the syndicate's rubbish, and for once the luck was with him. 2 large black plastic sacks of waste paper were standing in a small loading bay at the side of the building, awaiting collection. No note from Quinn to his confidential secretary, though, and Lewis felt disappointed. But there were several identical notes from Bartlett, which Lewis took along to Quinn's office, where Morse smoothed out one of them and read it. Monday, 17th of November. Notice to all staff. Practice fire drill. The fire alarm will ring at 12 noon on Friday the 21st of November, when all staff must immediately stop working, turn off all fires, lights, and other electrical appliances, close all windows and doors, and walk through the front door of the building and out into the front parking area. No one is to remain in the building for any reason, and normal work will not be resumed until everyone is accounted for. Signed, T.G. Bartlett, Secretary. He's a careful soul, isn't he, Lewis? Seems pretty efficient, sir. Perhaps so. Anyway, go along and ask him if there was a roll call. You never know. We may be able to postpone Quinn's execution from 11:15 to 12:15. In answer to his query, Lewis was informed by Bartlett that he'd better see the chief clerk upstairs, who'd been in charge of the whole operation. The chief clerk remembered the fire drill well, of course. Everything had gone according to plan, and the secretary had scrutinized the final list himself before allowing his staff to resume their duties. Of the 26 permanent staff, only 3 had not ticked themselves off, but all had been accounted for. Mr. Ogilby was down at the Oxford University Press, one of the typists had flu, and one of the junior clerks was on holiday. Against Quinn's name was a bold tick in black biro. Lewis walked downstairs and rejoined Morse. "I think we're making progress, sir. Just after 11 he finishes dictating his letters. He's here for fire drill at 12. Morse nodded, and Lewis felt encouraged to go on. "What I'd really like to know is whether he left that note for Miss Freeman before or after lunch." The internal phone rang, and Morse listened with interest. "Well, thank you for telling me, Dr. Bartlett. Can you ask him to come along straight away?" When Noakes began his brief tale, Morse wondered why on earth he'd not immediately sought the caretaker's confidence. "Yes, sir, his coat was there. I remember it distinct like, because his cabinet was open and I closed it. The secretary wouldn't have wanted that, sir. Very particular he is about that." "Was there a note on his desk?" "Yeah, we saw that as well, sir." "We, you say?" "Mr. Roop, sir, he was with me." "What was he doing here?" "He wanted to see the secretary, but he was out. I knew that, sir, so Mr. Roop asked me if any of the assistant secretaries was in. He had some papers, you see, as he wanted to give to somebody." "Who did you give them to?" "Well, we tried all the other secretaries' offices, but there was nobody in." "You're quite sure about that, Mr. Noakes?" "Oh, yes, sir. We couldn't find anybody, you see, and Mr. Roop left the papers on the secretary's desk." Morse glanced at Lewis, and his eyebrows rose perceptibly. "Could any of them have been upstairs, do you think?" "Oh, could have been, sir." "Did you see any of them at all, later on, I mean?" "Not really, sir. I saw Mr. Quinn leave in his car about—" "You what?" Morse sat up and blinked. "You saw him leave, you say?" "Yes, sir. About 10 to 5. His car was—" "Were there any other cars here?" interrupted Morse. "No, sir. Just Mr. Quinn's." "Well, thank you, Mr. Noakes. You've been very helpful." Morse got up and walked to the door. "And you didn't see anyone else? Anyone at all after that?" "No, sir. Except the secretary himself. He came back to the office about 5:30, sir." "I see. Well, thank you very much." Frank Greenway had Wednesday afternoon free, and he drove into the hospital car park at 1 p.m. He walked down the wide blue-carpeted entrance hall and made straight for the lift, where he pressed the button and ascended to the 6th floor.
Both Joyce and the baby were still isolated. Something to do with jaundice, nothing to worry about, Mr. Greenaway. And Frank walked once more into private room 12. The doctors had been firmly insistent that he should as yet say nothing whatsoever about the tragic death of their downstairs neighbour, Mr. Quinn. Your wife has had a pretty rough time, Mr. Greenaway. She would have to know soon, though. Couldn't help getting to know. But he had willingly agreed to play the game, and the sister had promised to have a word with each of Joyce's visitors. No Oxford mail either, of course. "How are you then, love? Fine? And the little one?" "Fine." They kissed. "I shan't be in here much longer, you realise that, don't you?" "Don't you worry about that." "You put the cot up yet?" "You just get on your feet again, look after the little fellow, that's all that matters." She smiled happily and nestled against his shoulder. "Funny, isn't it, Frank? We got names already, if it was a girl, and we were so sure it would be." "Yeah. I've been thinking, though, what about Simon? Nice name, don't you think, Simon Greenaway? What about that?" "Yeah. Lots of nice names for boys, though." "Such as?" "Well, you know that chap downstairs, Mr. Quinn? His name's Nicholas. Nice name, don't you think, Nicholas Greenaway? I quite like that, Frank." Mrs. Evans had been cleaning the ground floor of number 1 Pinewood Close for several years, and had almost been part of the tenancy for the line of single men who had rented the rooms from Mrs. Jardine. It was about 2 hours' work. She liked to get things done whilst no one was about, and with Quinn, 3 till 5 p.m. on Fridays was the regularly appointed time. She had usually finished and gone before he got back home, but the previous Friday she had to call at the Kidlington Health Centre for Mr. Evans, who had bronchitis. So she went herself to get Mr. E. a prescription, called in at the dispensing chemist, and then went home and got the tea. She got back to Quinn's house at about 6:15, and stayed about half an hour to do the ironing. "You left a note for him, didn't you, Mrs. Evans?" Sergeant Lewis asked. "I thought he'd wonder why I hadn't finished." "That was about 4 o'clock, you say?" She nodded. "We found the note in the waste paper basket, Mrs. Evans." "I suppose you would, sir, if he screwed it up, like." "Can you remember if Mr. Quinn's car was in the garage when you got back?" "No, Sergeant, I'm sorry." "You didn't see Mr. Quinn?" "No, I didn't." "Oh, well, never mind. If we could find out what time he got back from the office, well, it'd be a great help." Mrs. Evans looked at him with a puzzled frown. "But I can tell you what time he got home. You see, he left a note for me." "He left a note for you?" "Yes. Said he'd gone shopping or something." "So you—" Lewis started again. "You left the note at 4 o'clock, and went back there at 6:15, you say?" "That's right." "And found a note from him?" "Yes, Sergeant." "So you think he must have gone home, when, about 5? "Well, yes. He usually got home about then, I think." "You're sure the note was for you?" "Oh, yes. It got me name on it. I'll tell you what, Sergeant, I might still have got it. I'll probably put it in my pinny." As Mrs. Evans went out into the kitchen, Lewis found himself praying to the gods that for once they would smile upon him, and he felt almost sick with relief when she came back with a small folded sheet of paper and handed it to him. "Mrs. E. Just off shopping, shan't be long, N.Q." "Shopping," he says. "Funny time for shopping, isn't it?" "No, not really, sir. Supermarket's open till 9 of a Friday night." "The Quality supermarket, is that?" "Yes, sir. It's only just behind the house, really. There's a pathway by the side of the crescent, and now that the fence is down, you can get onto it from the side of the garden." It was just after 1 when Monica walked into the lounge bar of the Horse and Trumpet. She spotted Morse immediately, and after buying a gin and Campari, she walked across. "I thought I might find you here." Morse shrugged. "What have you got to tell me?" "You don't beat about the bush, do you?" "Sometimes I do." "You wanted to know what we were all doing on Friday afternoon. Is that right?" "That's it. Seems none of you were in the office, wherever else you were." "Well, I don't know about the others. No, that's not quite true, you see. Oh, dear. You don't make it very easy for me. I was out all afternoon and, well, I was with somebody else. And I suppose sooner or later you'll have to know who I was with, won't you?" "I think I know," said Morse quietly. Monica's face dropped. "You can't know. You already spoken? Have I spoken to Mr. Martin? No, not yet, but I shall be doing so very soon. Do you want to hear about it? Not now. I'd rather hear it from your boyfriend. As Donald Martin painfully corroborated Monica's story, Morse's facial expression was that of a man with a rotten egg stuck just beneath his nose. The pair of them had left the office at about 1:10 p.m. No, not together, in separate cars. Yes, to Monica's bungalow. Yes, to bed. That was all, really. What time did you leave? About 4:45. And you didn't come back to the office at all? No, I went straight home. Nice little surprise for your wife. Martin was silent. Lewis, go and see Miss Height. You've heard what this man says. Get her story and see if it fits. After Lewis had gone, Morse turned to Martin and looked him hard in the eyes. Why did you leave so early? There's Sally, that's Monica's daughter. She usually gets home from school about 4:15. And you didn't want her to find you shagging her mother, is that it? After Martin had gone, Morse rang HQ and gave Constable Dixon his instructions, and he was smiling contentedly to himself when Lewis returned. She confirms what Martin says, sir. Does she now? You sound a bit dubious. For what it's worth, Lewis, I think they're a pair of bloody liars. But I may be wrong, of course. As you know, I often am. He had that deprecatingly conceited look on his face, which many found the Chief Inspector's least attractive trait. What about security? Asked Morse cautiously, like a timid skater testing the ice. Ogilvy thought for a moment. It's a constant problem, of course, but everyone's conscious of it, and so in an odd sort of way the problem solves itself, if you see what I mean. Is there never any malpractice? If a candidate decides to cheat in the examination room, then we've just got to rely on the invigilators keeping a very careful eye on things, and reporting anything suspicious directly to us. What do you do about it? We disqualify the candidates concerned from every subject in the examination. I see. Morse tried another angle. You send out the question papers before the examination, don't you? The question papers are sent out directly to examination departments and then distributed to heads of centres, not to individual teachers. But let's take a headmaster, then. If he was a crook, let's say he opened a particular package of question papers and showed them to his pupils. Ogilvy smiled. We inspect our centres regularly after they've been accepted, and they have to meet pretty high standards of integrity and administrative competence even before they're recognised in the first place. The schools are regularly inspected, then? Oh, yes. Is that the sort of job that Mr. Bland does in Aljamara? Morse watched Ogilvy carefully, but the deputy sailed serenely on. Among other things, yes. He's in charge of the whole administrative set-up there. Morse pondered a while, and then told him, We've got to find a motive for Quinn's murder, sir. There are 101 possibilities, of course, but I was just wondering if perhaps he'd found some suggestion of jiggery-pokery, that's all. Anyway, you've been very helpful. Ogilvy stood up to go, and Morse too rose from his chair. I've been asking the others what they were doing last Friday afternoon. I suppose I ought to ask you too, if you can remember, that is. Oh, yes, that's easy enough. I went down to the Oxford University Press in the morning, had a pretty late lunch at the Burney place there with the chief printer, and got back here about 3:30, I should think. And you spent the rest of the afternoon in the office here? Yes. Are you sure about that, sir? Ogilvy looked at him with steady eyes. Quite sure. What would you say, then, sir, if someone said there was no one here on Friday afternoon between 4:15 and 5:15? I'd say this someone was mistaken, Inspector. Constable Dixon knocked at the spruce detached bungalow in Old Marston. The door was immediately opened by a smartly dressed, attractive young woman. Miss Height? Yes. Is your daughter in? Don't be silly, I'm only 16. Dixon grinned and accepted the young lady's invitation to step inside. It's about Mr. Quinn, isn't it? Ever so exciting. Just think, he worked in the same office as Mummy. Did you ever meet him, miss? No, worst luck. Why aren't you at school today, miss? Oh, I'm taking some O-levels again. They let us off when we haven't got an exam. Great, really. I've been off since lunchtime. Do you always come home when you're free, I mean? Nothing else to do, is there? You revise, I suppose? A bit, but I usually watch telly. You know, the kiddies' programmes. Quite good, really. Dixon coughed awkwardly. He'd done the bit of homework that Morse had asked him to. I watched one of those kiddies' films, miss, about a dog. Last Friday afternoon, I think it was. Oh, yes, I watched that. I cried nearly all the way through. Did it make you cry? Bit of a tearjerker, I agree, miss. But I mustn't keep you from your revising. As I say, it was your mother I really wanted to see. He got to his feet. He thought the Chief Inspector would be pleased with him. At 7 p.m. that same evening, Morse sat alone in his office. Dixon had reported on his visit to Sally Height. Monica, Morse reflected, had lied to him. Martin had lied to him. It was odds on that Ogilvy had lied to him. Had Bartlett lied as well? For half an hour he let his thoughts run wild and free, like randy rabbits in orgiastic intercourse, and then he put a stop to it. He needed a few more facts, and facts were facing him, here and now, in the dark blue plastic bag containing the items found in Quinn's pockets, in Quinn's green anorak, and in Lewis's inventories. Morse cleared the top of his desk and set to work. Quinn's pockets had thrown up a wallet, a grubby handkerchief, half a packet of polo, a diary, not a single entry, 43 pence, 1/2 of a cinema ticket, 2 black biros, and a statement from Lloyd's Bank, Summertown branch, showing a current account balance of £114.40. The wallet first. A driving licence, RAC membership card, Lloyd's Bank cheque card, 1 £5 note, 3 £1 coins, and a syndicate acknowledgement card on which was written 2 telephone numbers. Morse picked up the phone and dialed the first, but his ears were greeted only by a continuous high-pitched monotone. He dialed the second. "Hello, Monica Height here." Morse put down the receiver. It was the buff-coloured right-hand half of the cinema ticket which next attracted Morse's attention. Across the top were the numbers 102, beneath them the words "Rear Lounge," and along the right edge, running down, the numbers 93550. Somebody must know which cinema it was, he supposed. And then it struck him. It wasn't 102 across the top at all. There was just the slightest gap between the O and the 2, and Morse saw the name of the cinema staring up at him. Studio 2. He knew the place in Walton Street. Morse had bought a copy of the previous day's Oxford Mail, wherein the Quinn murder had been briefly reported, and he turned the pages and found that Tuesday was the Critics' Day for reporting to the citizens of Oxford on the quality of the entertainments currently available. It is all too easy to see why the nymphomaniac has been retained for a further week at Studio 2. The aficionados have been flocking to see the Swedish sexpot Inga Nielsen dutifully exposing her 40-inch bosom at the slightest provocation. Flock on. Morse flicked through the telephone directory, found the number, and asked to speak to the manager, who turned out to be the manageress. "Oh, yes, sir, all our tickets are traceable. Buff, you say, Rear Lounge? Oh, yes, we should be able to help you. Have you got the number?" Morse read out the number. "Just 1 minute, sir." It turned into 3 or 4. "Are you there, sir?" "Yes, that's right. Last Friday, it's one of the first tickets issued. The doors opened at 1:15 and the programme started at 1:30. The first Rear Lounge number is 93543, so it must have been issued in the first 5 or 10 minutes, I should think." "You quite sure about this?" "Oh, quite sure, sir. I think I ought to mention, Inspector, that someone else asked me the same sort of thing last week." "What?" "I said someone else had—" "When was this? Do you remember?" "Well, I'm not quite sure. Sometime— Let me see now. I ought to remember. It's not very often. Was it Friday?" Morse was excited and impatient. "Yes, or Saturday, perhaps. A man, was it?" "Yes, he had a nice sort of voice. Educated, you know what I mean?" "What did he ask you?" "Well, it was funny, really. He said he was a detective story writer, and he wanted to check up on some details." "What details?" "Well, I remember he said he'd got to put some numbers on a ticket his detective had found, and he wanted to know how many figures there were, that sort of thing. Morse put down the phone and whistled softly to himself. Had someone else found Quinn's body and the cinema ticket before Tuesday morning? Long before? Saturday. The manageress had said it might have been Saturday. And it couldn't have been Friday, could it? Morse looked quickly again at the Oxford Mail and saw the Times. The Nymphomaniac, 1:30 to 3:20 p.m. Until 3:20 on Friday, Quinn had been feasting his eyes on Inga Nielsen's mighty bosom, and few things surely would have dragged him out of Studio 2 before the film had finished. Unless, of course, at long last it struck him, the pretty strong probability that Quinn had not been sitting alone in Studio 2 that Friday afternoon. Morse stood with Lewis in Pinewood Close at 2 p.m. on the following afternoon, awaiting the arrival of Mrs. Jardine. 2 men were repairing the street lamp in front of number 1, and Morse strolled over to them. "How long before they come and smash it up again?" "Oh, you never know, sir. But to be truthful, we don't get too much vandalism around here, do we, Jack?" But Morse had no chance of hearing Jack's views, for Mrs. Jardine drew up in her car, and the 3 of them disappeared into the house, where for half an hour they sat together in the front room. Mrs. Jardine told them as much as she knew. Quinn had been a model tenant, it seemed, quiet, orderly, and no gramophone. Girlfriends? Not that she knew of. The others upstairs? Oh, they got along well with Mr. Quinn, she thought, though she couldn't really know, could she? Anyway, no disputes over the telephone bill. Morse was puzzled. "I don't quite follow you." "Well, there's a shared line between them, you see. There's a phone upstairs in the Greenways' bedroom, and one here in this room." "I see." The same day, Joyce Greenaway had been moved from the intensive care unit at the John Radcliffe Hospital, and when one of her old school friends came to see her at 2:30 p.m., she was in a pleasant ward 2 stories below, in the company of 3 other recently delivered mothers. Later she had a sleep, and was awoken by the clatter of cups at 4 o'clock, and a quarter of an hour later the trolley came round with books and newspapers. She bought the Oxford Mail. Morse was a few minutes early for his appointment, but the Dean of the Syndicate was ready for him in his oak-panelled rooms on the old staircase in the inner quad of Lonsdale College. "Would you say the Syndicate is a happy sort of place, sir?" "Oh, yes, I think everybody. No hostility, no, personal animosities." The Dean looked a little uneasy, and it was clear that he might have 1 or 2 reservations. "There are always a few, difficulties. You'll find them in every, Has this got anything to do with Mr. Quinn?" "One of the incidents I'm thinking of happened when we were appointing Quinn." He gave a brief account of the interviewing committee's disagreement, and Morse listened with deep interest. "Look, sir, please be quite frank with me. Would I be right in saying that there's not much love lost between Bartlett and Roop?" "I really do think it would be fairer if you asked them, don't you?" "What about the permanent staff? Any, friction there?" "Oh, amongst the graduates, you mean? No, I don't think so." "What about Bartlett? Is he well liked?" "What do you mean?" "I just wondered if any of the other graduates had any cause to, you know?" Morse didn't know what he wondered, but the Dean, it seemed, did. "Oh, I suppose you're thinking of Ogleby." Morse nodded sagely. "Oh, that's ancient history, though, isn't it? It's a long time ago now. I remember at the time thinking that Ogleby was potentially the better man. In fact, I voted for him, but with hindsight, I'm sure that Bartlett was the wiser choice. And we were all very glad that Ogleby was willing to accept the post of Deputy Secretary. Very able man." Lewis finished his cup of tea, and was leaving the police canteen as Dixon walked in. "See you're appealing for help, Sarge. Almost stuck, is he?" He handed Lewis the Oxford Mail and pointed to the paragraph at the bottom of the front page. "Murder inquiry. Police investigating the murder of Mr. N. Quinn, 1 Pinewood Close, Kidlington, whose body was found on Tuesday morning by a colleague from the Foreign Examination Syndicate, are appealing to anyone who may have seen the murdered man on either the evening of Friday, the 21st of November, or on Saturday, the 22nd of November, to come forward. An inquest will be held next Monday." Lewis soon found the young manager of the Quality supermarket, and learned that the flimsy short roll of paper he had brought with him was a richly seamed mine of information. Custom of flow was fairly constant on Fridays, and though the manager refused to be precise, the items listed had doubtless been purchased in the late afternoon or early evening. If he had to guess, well, between 5 and 6:30 p.m. Unfortunately, however, the plump little woman who was summoned in her capacity as I.C. Till 3 failed to register even the vaguest recollection of ever having seen the face on the photograph she was shown. It was the goods she always watched, you see, seldom the faces. Ah, well. Christopher Roop had willingly agreed to meet Morse on Friday just after 12 noon at the Black Dog in St. Aldate's, just opposite the great portal of Christchurch. Roop had mentioned that he might be a few minutes late. He had a tutorial until 12, but Morse waited happily with a pint of beer in front of him. He looked forward to meeting the young chemist, and already he had gleaned a few significant facts about him. First, he had learned that Roop had spent some time with one of the Gulf petroleum companies, and might therefore have been in some sort of liaison with the men of power. For a deal there must have been at some stage, doubtless, though later, involving Bland at the Oxford end, in a perverse though infinitely profitable betrayal of public trust. It was certainly a possibility. Second, Roop was a chemist, and whoever had murdered Quinn had a great deal of technical knowledge about the fatal dosages of cyanide. A trio of laughing, long-haired, bearded undergraduates came into the bar, T-shirted and bejeaned, and Morse pondered on the changing times. He drained his glass and looked at his watch. "Chief Inspector Morse?" It was one of the bearded trio, and Morse realized that he was a good deal further out of touch than he had imagined. "Mr. Roop?" The young man nodded. "Can I get you a refill?" Over their beer, Morse explained as much of the situation as he deemed prudent, and stressed the importance of trying to fix the exact time of Quinn's death. When he came to ask about Roop's visit to the syndicate on the previous Friday, he was impressed to find how carefully Roop retraced his steps from the moment he had entered the building. "You say there was a note on Quinn's desk?" "Yes." "But you don't remember exactly what it said?" Roop was silent for a few seconds. "Not really. Something about being back soon, I think." "And Quinn's anorak was on one of the chairs?" "That's right, over the back of the chair behind his desk." "And the cabinets were open, you say?" "One of them was, I'm sure of that. The caretaker locked it." Roop grinned. "Bit of a sod, you know, old Bartlett. Keeps them all on their toes." "How do you get on with him, sir?" "Me?" Roop laughed aloud. "We don't see eye to eye, I'm afraid." "I gathered you weren't exactly bosom pals." "You mustn't believe everything you hear." Morse let it ride. "Mr. Ogleby wasn't in his room, you say?" "Not while I was there." "How long were you there, sir?" "Quarter of an hour, I suppose. Must have been. If Ogleby or any of the others were there, well, I just didn't see them, that's all. And I'm pretty sure I would have done if they had been there." Morse nodded again. "I think you're right, sir. I don't think anyone was there." "Anything else I can tell you?" Morse asked Roop to account for his activities during the rest of the previous Friday, and Roop gladly obliged. He'd caught the 8:05 to London, arrived at Paddington at 9:10, caught the Inner Circle tube to Mansion House, conferred with his publishers about the final proofs of a forthcoming opus on industrial chemistry, left about 10:45, had a chicken salad in the Strand somewhere, spent an hour or so in the National Portrait Gallery in Trafalgar Square, and then returned to Paddington, where he'd caught the 3:05 to Oxford. Morse himself couldn't have specified the reason, but suddenly he'd become convinced that somehow, somewhere, Roop was lying. It was all too pat, too slick. A good deal of it must be true. The bit about the publishers, for instance. He'd obviously gone to London all right, but exactly when had he returned? Roop said he'd left his publishers at about 10:45 a.m. Taxi to Paddington, perhaps? Easy. Roop could have been back in Oxford before lunchtime. "Tell me something else, if you will. Did you know Quinn before he came to Oxford?" "No." "You come from that part of the country, though, don't you?" "You've done your homework, I see." "That's what they pay me for, sir." "I'm from Bradford, and so was Quinn. But let me spell it out. I'd never set eyes on him before he came before the interviewing committee. All right. Tell me this. Was it raining when you came back from London? Raining like hell, yes. Suddenly, the light dawned in his eyes. Yes! I got a taxi from the station straight to the syndicate. There'll be a record of that somewhere, surely. I don't care what you ask her, snapped Morse. When I've fetched her in here, just keep her talking for 10 minutes. That's all I ask. Sergeant Lewis looked inordinately uncomfortable. What do you want me to find out? Oh, anything you like. Ask her what her measurements are. I wish you'd try and be serious, sir. Well, ask her whether a gin goes straight to her tits or something. Morse crossed the corridor, knocked on Monica's door and went in. Can you spare a minute, Miss Height? Won't take long. He escorted her politely to Quinn's office, showed her to the chair that faced Lewis, a reluctant interlocutor, and himself stood idly aside. The phone went a few minutes later, and Lewis answered it. For you, sir. Morse here. Ah, Inspector, can I see you for a minute? It's, rather important. Can you come along straight away? I'm on my way. Morse excused himself without further explanation. Once inside Monica's office, he worked swiftly. First, the bulky sheepskin jacket hanging up in the wall cupboard. Nothing of interest in either pocket. Next, the handbag. Makeup, checkbook, diary, paper-mate pen, comb, small bottle of perfume, pair of earrings, packet of Dunhill cigarettes, matches, and a purse. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the catch and poked his fingers amidst the small change and the keys and the stamps, and there it was. Egods, he'd been right. He hadn't been away for more than 2 or 3 minutes, and Lewis was relieved to see him back so soon. He sat on the corner of the table and looked at her. Why did you lie to me about last Friday afternoon? Monica was not, it appeared, surprised. It was Sally, wasn't it? I realized, of course, what your man was up to. Well? I don't know. I suppose it sounded less sordid somehow, saying we went to my place. Less sordid than what? You know, motoring around, stopping in lay-bys and hoping no one else would pull in. And that's what you did? Yes. Would Mr. Martin back you up? Yes, if you explained to him why... You mean you haven't done that already? The tone of Morse's voice was becoming increasingly harsh, and Monica coloured deeply. Don't you think we ought to ask him? No, I don't. You've got him round your little finger, woman. Anyone can see that. I'm not interested in your web of lies. I want the truth. We're investigating a murder, not a bloody parking offence. Look, Inspector, I can't do much more than tell the truth. Of course you can. You can tell me the truth. You seem terribly sure. And so I am, woman. What the hell do you think that is? He banged his right hand furiously on the top of the desk, and revealed the torn-off half of a cinema ticket. Across the top were the letters I.O., and almost immediately after them the number 2. Beneath were the words Rear Lounge, and along the right-hand edge, running downwards, were the numbers 93556. Monica looked down at the ticket as if mesmerized. Well? Monica sighed deeply. Do you mind getting me a cigarette, Inspector? As I think you know, mine are in my handbag. Yes, she said. Morse had been right. With Sally back from school that afternoon, there was no chance of going home, and she wasn't that keen in any case. It was Donald who suggested they should go to the cinema, and she had agreed. It would be an unnecessary risk to be seen going in together, and so it was arranged that he should go in at 1:20 and she a few minutes later. They would each buy a ticket separately, and he would sit on the back row of the rear lounge in Studio 2 and watch out for her. Everything had gone as planned, and they had left the cinema at about 3:30. She herself had gone straight home afterwards, and so, for all she knew, had Donald. Naturally, they'd both been worried when they heard that the police wanted to know their whereabouts on Friday afternoon, and so they'd foolishly, well, Morse knew what they'd done. It wasn't all that far from the truth, though, was it? But yes, they'd lied about that Friday afternoon, of course they had. Pathetically, Martin himself began to repeat the unauthorized version, but Monica stopped him. Tell them the truth, Donald, I just have. They know exactly where we both were on Friday afternoon. Oh, Oh, I see. Martin stumbled his way through the same story. No discrepancy, anyway. He, like Monica, it seemed, had gone straight home afterwards, and that was that.
One more question.
Morse got up from the edge of the table and leaned against the nearest cabinet.
Let me ask you both once again. Did either of you see Mr. Quinn on Friday afternoon?
Their faces registered blank. They shook their heads, and with apparent earnestness they said that they hadn't.
Would it surprise you both if I told you that there was another of your colleagues in Studio 2 last Friday afternoon?
Martin turned deathly pale, and Monica opened her mouth like a chronic asthmatic fighting for breath. Morse, as he later realized, would have been wiser if he'd allowed his little speech to take its full effect. But he didn't.
You may well look surprised. You see, we know exactly where Mr. Quinn was on Friday afternoon. He was sitting along with the pair of you in the rear lounge of Studio 2.
Donald Martin and Monica Heights stared at him in astonishment. After they'd gone, Morse admitted to himself that their behaviour didn't make sense. Why had they ever told that abject lie in the first place? There was every risk, with Sally at home so often, that even a moderately competent detective would pretty soon ferret out the truth about that. Why, then? If they'd gone to the cinema together, why not say so? It seemed infinitely less reprehensible than the sordid liaison to which they'd both been prepared to admit. People did go to the pictures together. It would cause a bit of talk, of course it would, if someone saw them, but that was all. So why this insane compulsion to keep it a secret? Morse invited Bartlett along to Quinn's office, and told him of his difficulties in establishing the whereabouts of everyone on that Friday afternoon. Bartlett frowned.
What do the girls say?
What girls?
The girls who collect the out trays.
Morse mentally kicked himself.
What time are the trays collected?
4 o'clock every afternoon. The post office van is usually here about 4:15, and we like to have everything ready before then.
Bartlett rang through to the registry, and almost immediately a young, fair-haired girl came in. She had collected the trays on Friday afternoon. Yes, at 4 o'clock. And no one was there. Neither Ogleby, nor Miss Height, nor Martin, nor Quinn. No, she was quite sure. Morse walked slowly up the corridor with Bartlett. "I'd like to have a long chat with you sometime, sir, about the office, I mean. There are so many things."
"Why not come out and have a meal with us? My wife's a jolly good cook, you'll find. What about it?"
"Oh, that's very kind of you, sir. When do you suggest?"
"Well, any time, really. Tonight, if you like."
Morse sat alone in his office. It was over 2.5 hours before he was due at the Bartletts, and he welcomed the solitude and the chance to think. The groceries which Quinn had purchased, and the list of the provisions found in his kitchen, proved more interesting than Morse had expected. 2 pieces of steak and a bag of mushrooms, for instance. Bit extravagant for one person. Perhaps it might have been for 2. Morse looked at the 2 lists again and noticed a fact he'd missed before. Quinn already had 2 half-pound packs of butter in his fridge, yet for some reason he'd bought another. Different brand, too. Odd. The phone went. "It's a Mrs. Greenaway, sir, from the John Radcliffe. Says she wants to talk to the man in charge of the Quinn murder." Mrs. Greenaway, eh? The woman living above Quinn. Well, well. She had read the report in the Oxford Mail, she said, and felt that she ought to ring the police. Well, she hadn't been due to have the baby until December, but she'd known about 4 o'clock on Friday, the contractions. Well, she'd rung up the works where Frank, my husband, Inspector, where Frank worked, and tried to get a message to him. But something must have gone wrong. She'd sat there by the window, watching and waiting, but no one came. And then she'd rung the works again about 4:45. Anyway, she saw Quinn come in his car just after 5.
"You saw him?"
"Yes, about 5:05 it must have been. He drove in, put his car in the garage."
"Was anybody with him?"
"No."
"Go on, Mrs. Greenaway."
"Well, there's nothing else, really." "Mrs. Greenaway, are you absolutely sure you saw Mr. Quinn?" "Well, perhaps I didn't actually... I heard him on the phone, though."
"You what?"
"Yes, we've got a shared line, and it was just after he came in. I was really getting worried, and I thought I'd try the works again, but I couldn't get through because Mr. Quinn was using the phone." Was he talking for long? Quite a while. I picked up the phone 2 or 3 times, and they were still... You don't remember a name? Any name that Mr. Quinn used? Christian name, surname? Anything at all that could help us? Joyce Greenaway was silent for a minute. There was a very vague recollection, but it slipped away from her. No, I can't remember. Not a woman, was it, that he was talking to? Oh, no, it was a man, all right. Sounded an educated sort of man. Well, you know what I mean. It wasn't a common sort of voice. Look, Mrs. Greenaway, please, think very hard. It's vitally important. Do you understand? If you could remember even the slightest thing. But nothing would come, although the outline of that name still lurked subliminally, if only... Morse did it for her. Ogilby? Mr. Ogilby, does that ring any bells? No. Roop? Bartlett? Joyce's scalp tingled. She'd been fishing for a verbal shape like Bartlett. Could it have been? I can't be sure, Inspector, but it might have been Bartlett. Mrs. Bartlett was 3 or 4 inches taller than her husband, and she ordered him around as if he were a naughty but lovable little schoolboy. There was another surprise, too. No one had mentioned to Morse that the Bartletts had a son, and the bearded young man, who was introduced as Richard, seemed not particularly anxious to make a favourable impression. But whilst the 4 of them sat drinking their sherry, it became apparent that young Richard had a pleasant and attractive personality, as he and Morse discussed the respective merits of the Schulte and Furtwängler recordings of the Ring. Mrs. Bartlett slipped away to push a cautious fork into the Brussels sprouts, and summoned her husband to open the wine. The table was set for the 4 of them, the silver cutlery winking and sparkling on the white tablecloth in the dimly lit room. The soup was ready now, and Morse tossed back the last of his sherry, got to his feet, and walked across the wide room. "Come on then, Richard," his mother said it pleasantly. "Don't worry about me, I'm not hungry." "But you must, Richard, The young man stood up. "I've just told you, Mother, I'm not hungry." "Just have a—" "I don't want any bloody food! How many times do you want telling, you stupid woman?" He stalked out of the room, and almost immediately the front door slammed. "I'm awfully sorry, Inspector." "Oh, don't worry about me, Mrs. Bartlett. Some of the youngsters these days, you know." "Oh, it's not that, Inspector. You see, Richard suffers from schizophrenia. He can be absolutely charming, and then, well, he gets like you saw him just now." "Can it be treated?" Mrs. Bartlett smiled sadly. "We've spent literally thousands. He's a voluntary patient at Littlemore at the moment. Sometimes he comes home at the weekends, and just occasionally, like tonight, he'll drop in and sit around and have something to eat." Only when Mrs. Bartlett was washing the pots were the 2 men able to talk, and Morse's earlier impression that the secretary knew exactly what was going on in his own office was cumulatively confirmed. With every subtlety he knew, Morse tried to draw out any suspicion of secret doubt, but the secretary was deeply loyal to his staff, and Morse knew that he was tiptoeing too delicately. He decided the time had come. "What did Mr. Quinn want when he rang you up?" Bartlett blinked, and was silent for a while. Morse knew perfectly well that if Bartlett denied that Quinn had spoken to him, that would be the end of it, but there was no hard evidence on the point. "You know that he did ring me, then?" "Yes, sir." "Do you mind telling me how you know?" "Quinn's telephone is on a shared line. Someone overheard you." Did Morse catch a sudden flash of alarm behind the friendly lenses? If he did, it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "You want me to tell you what the conversation was about?" "I think you should have told me before, sir. It would have saved a great deal of trouble." "Well, I'm not going to tell you. It was a very personal matter between Quinn and myself." "Perhaps it was a personal matter that led to him being murdered, sir." "Yes, I realize that." Morse slowly drained his coffee. "I don't think you realize exactly how important this is, sir. You see, unless we can find out where Quinn was, and what he was doing that Friday evening—" Bartlett looked at him sharply. "You said nothing about Friday before." "You mean—" "I mean that Quinn rang me up one evening last week, yes, but it wasn't Friday." Just after 8:15 p.m. that same evening, a man was taking the lid off the highly polished bronze coal scuttle when he heard the knock, and he got slowly to his feet and opened the door. Well, well, come on in. I shan't be a minute. Take a seat. He knelt down again by the fire and extracted a lump of coal with the tongs. In his own head, it sounded as if he had taken an enormous bite from a large, crisp apple. His jaws seemed to clamp together, and for a weird and terrifying second he sought frantically to rediscover some remembrance of himself along the empty, echoing corridors of his brain. His right hand still held the tongs, and even as his left hand began instinctively to raise itself towards the shattered skull, he knew that life was ended. The light snapped suddenly out, as if someone had switched on the darkness. Mrs. Bartlett got up to answer the phone at 11:15. It was for Morse. Lewis told him as quickly and as clearly as he could what had happened. The Oxford City Police had been called in about 9 o'clock. Chief Inspector Bell was in charge. It was only later that they realised how it might all tie in, and they tried to get Morse, and had finally got Lewis. The man had been killed instantly by a savage blow with a poker across the back of the skull. No prints or anything like that. Drawers had been ransacked. As he came back into the room, Morse's face was pale with shock. "It's Ogleby. He's been murdered." Mrs. Bartlett buried her head in her hands, whilst the secretary himself, as he showed Morse to the front door, had difficulty in putting his words together coherently. "You asked about Quinn. When he rang me, you asked about it. I said..." "Yes?" He said that he'd found out something I ought to know. He said that someone from the office was deliberately leaking question papers." "Did he say who it was?" "Oh, yes, Inspector. He said it was me." When Morse arrived at the neat little terraced house in Walton Street, Lewis was engaged in conversation with Inspector Bell. Ogilby's head was an ugly sight, and Morse turned his head away, closed his eyes, and felt the nausea rising in his gorge. "Look, Lewis, I want you to get on to one or two things straight away. I want to know exactly where Roop was tonight, where Martin was, where Miss Height was, where—" Bell interrupted him. "I've just been telling the sergeant. Miss Height was the one who found him. She rang through on a 999 call and then fainted. Somebody found her slumped by the public telephone box just up the road. They've taken her to the Radcliffe for the night." "Why did she come here?" "Said she wanted to talk to him about something important." "Was the door unlocked?" "No." "How the hell did she get in then?" "She's got a key." "Has she now?" It was in the early hours of Saturday morning that Morse found what he was looking for. Only he and Lewis remained, apart from the 2 Oxford City constables standing guard outside. "Come here, Lewis, look at this." It was the diary found in Ogilby's hip pocket. It was a blue university diary with a small flap at the back, which could be used for railway tickets and the like. Lewis himself picked up the diary and looked with his usual thorough care at every page in turn. On a page headed Notes at the back, he saw something that made his eyeballs bulge. There, drawn with accuracy and neatness, was a small square diagram. Along the top it read IO2. Down one side was the number 93550. Rear Lounge was printed along the bottom. "My God," said Lewis. "It's the same number as the ticket we found on Quinn." Morse was in his office at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, tired and unshaven. He folded over the back page of the Times, looked at his watch, wrote the time in the left-hand margin, and began. It took him 12.5 minutes. Lewis had managed to see Martin, who, so he said, had felt restless and worried the previous evening, gone out about 7:30 p.m. and got back home at about 11:15. He had taken his car, called at several pubs near Radcliffe Square, and on his return had been banished by his wife to the doghouse. Roop said he had been at home working all evening. No callers, seldom did have any callers. The phone went. It was the Dean of the Examinations Syndicate phoning from Lonsdale College. What a terrible business it all was, frightening. Did Morse remember asking about relationships within the syndicate? Well, somehow the murders of Quinn and Ogleby had brought it all back. It was the night when they'd had the big do at the Sheridan with the Aljamara lot. Some of them had stayed very late, long after the others had gone to bed. Quinn was one of them, and Ogleby another. And the Dean had felt at the time, he could be totally wrong of course, that Ogleby had been waiting for Quinn to go, had been watching him in a rather curious way. And when Quinn had left, Ogleby had followed him out almost immediately. Monica appeared drawn and nervous as Morse looked down at her, sitting up against the pillow, her ample hospital nightie softening the contours of her lovely body. "Tell me about it." Her voice was quiet but firm. "There's not much to tell, really. I called in to see him about 8:30. He was just lying—" "You had a key?" She nodded. "Yes." Her eyes seemed suddenly very sad, and Morse pressed the point no further. "He was lying there?" She nodded. "I just couldn't stay in that terrible room. I knew there was a phone there, but I went out into the street and rang the police from the phone box. I don't remember any more. I must have stepped out of the box and just fainted. The next thing I remember was being in the ambulance." "Why did you go to see him?" I hadn't really had any chance to talk to him about Nick, and—" "You think he knew something about Quinn's murder?" She smiled sadly and wearily. "He was a very clever man, Inspector." "You didn't see anyone else?" She shook her head. "Could there have been anyone else in the house?" "I don't know. I just don't know." Should he believe her? She'd told so many lies already. But there must have been some cause for the lies, and Morse was convinced that if only he could discover that cause, he would make the biggest leap forward in the case so far. It was the Studio 2 business that worried him most. Why, he repeated to himself, why had Monica and Donald Martin lied so clumsily about it? "Who did you see going into Studio 2, Miss Height?" "Why don't you call me Monica?" The nurse put her head through the curtains and told Morse that he really ought to leave now. He stood up and looked down at her. "You didn't see anyone going into Studio 2, did you, Monica?" For a second there was hesitation in her eyes, and then she looked at him earnestly. "No, I didn't. You must believe that." She took Morse's hand and squeezed it gently against her soft breast. "Come again, won't you? And try to look after me. I'm frightened, Inspector. I'm so very frightened." Morse was driving through the twisting alleys that led down into Walton Street, when he saw a familiar figure striding up towards the hospital. He stopped the car and wound down the window. "Hello, Mr. Martin. I was just coming along to see you. Jump in." "Sorry, not now. I'm going to visit—" "You're not." "Who says?" "Jump in." 3/4 of an hour later, with the office clock showing 2:30, Morse's irritation with the young philanderer was mounting towards open animosity. Donald Martin repeated what he'd already told Lewis about his whereabouts the previous evening. Why did Morse keep on and on at him about it? He'd gone nowhere near Ogilby's. Morse said nothing to enlighten him. "Let's come back to last Friday afternoon." "All right, I lied for a start, but why did you say you spent the afternoon at Miss Height's house?" "I don't know, really. Monica thought—" His voice trailed off. "Yes, she's told me." "Has she?" "Yes," lied Morse. Martin looked down at the carpet. "I don't know why she didn't want to say we'd been to the pictures. I don't, honestly. I didn't think it mattered all that much, so I agreed to do what she said." "It's a bit odd to say you'd been to bed when all you'd done was sit together in the cinema." "But it's the truth, Inspector. We stayed in the cinema till about 3:45. You've got to believe that. I had nothing at all, nothing to do with Nick's death. Nor did Monica. We were together all afternoon." Martin was convincing him. He knew that. Assume he was there that Friday afternoon. With Monica? Yes, assume that too. Sit them down there on the back row of the rear lounge, Morse. Martin had been waiting for her, and she'd come in. Yes, keep going. She'd come in, and who, if anyone, had they seen? No, go back a bit. Who had Martin seen going in? No, who had Monica seen going in? Or, yes. Think of it the other way for a minute.
Ogilvy must have known all about Quinn's ticket, mustn't he? In fact, he must have seen it. When? Where? Why had he made a careful freehand drawing of that ticket? Ogilvy must have known, or at least suspected, that the ticket was vitally important. All right. Agree that Monica and Martin had seen the film together. But had Quinn gone? Or had someone just wished to make everyone else think that he'd gone? Who?
Early on Saturday evening, Mr. Nigel Denniston decided to begin. Aljamara was the first school on his list, and he slit open the carefully sealed envelope and took out the contents. The attendance sheet was placed on top of the scripts. According to the attendance sheet, there were 5 candidates entered, and all 5 were duly registered as present by the distant invigilator. An hour later, he'd finished the first 4 scripts. The candidates had tried, of course they had, but he felt quite unjustified in awarding the sort of marks that could bring them anywhere near the pass range. Tentatively, he had written his own provisional percentages at the top right-hand corner of each script. 27%, 34%, 35%, 19%. He decided to finish off the last one before supper. Ah, this was a better script. My goodness, it was. And as he read on, he realized that it was very good indeed. He penciled in 90%, and then wondered why he hadn't given it 95% or even 99%. Wonderful lad. Perfunctorily, Denniston looked at the name. Dubal. In Aljamara itself, the last of the autumn examinations, crowded into just 1 week, had finished the previous afternoon, and George Bland tried to relax with an iced gin and tonic in his air-conditioned flat. The international telegram had arrived on Wednesday morning. Tragic news, stop. Quinn dead, stop. Murder suspected, stop. Will Wright, stop. Bartlett. But there had been another telegram, received only that morning, and this time it was unsigned. He had burned it immediately. He walked over to his desk and took out his passport once more. All was in order, and tucked safely inside was his ticket on the scheduled flight to Cairo, due to leave at noon the following day. On Monday morning, the inquest on Nicholas Quinn was held in the courtroom behind the main Oxford City Police HQ in St Aldate's. It was 10 minutes past 11 before all concerned had filed into the court, where the coroner's sergeant quietly but firmly organised the seating to his liking, before disappearing through a door at the back of the court, and almost immediately reappearing with the coroner himself. All rose to their feet as the sergeant intoned the judicial ritual. First, the identification of the deceased was established by Mr. Quinn Sr. Then Mrs. Jardine took the box, then Donald Martin, then Bartlett, then Sergeant Lewis, then Constable Dixon. Next, the thin, hump-backed surgeon gave evidence of the autopsy. "Chief Inspector Morse, please." Morse walked into the witness box and took the oath. "You're in charge of the investigation into the death of Mr. Nicholas Quinn?" "Yes, sir." "Are you prepared to indicate to the court the present state of your investigations into this matter?" "Not yet, sir. And with your honour's permission, I would wish to make a formal application for the inquest to be adjourned for a fortnight." "Am I to understand, Chief Inspector, that your inquiries are likely to be completed in that time?" "An arrest is imminent." "Indeed?" Morse took a warrant from his inside pocket and held it up before the court. He turned his head slightly and ran his eyes along the front bench. Richard Bartlett, Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Jardine, Donald Martin, Dr. Bartlett, Monica Height, and Christopher Roop. The coroner formally adjourned the inquest for 2 weeks, and the court stood as the august personage departed. Now there was a hush over the assembly. No one seemed to breathe or to blink, as Morse slowly stepped down from the witness box and stood momentarily before Richard Bartlett, and then walked on, past Mrs. Evans, past Mrs. Jardine, past Martin, past Bartlett, past Monica Height, and then stood in front of Roop, and stayed there. "Christopher Algernon Roop, I have here a warrant for your arrest in connection with the murder of Nicholas Quinn." All eyes were on Roop as he walked out, Dixon on his right and Lewis on his left, but still no one said a word. Bartlett was the first to move. He looked utterly dumbfounded, and walked like an automaton towards his son. Monica's eyes crossed the gap that Bartlett had left, and found Donald's looking directly into her own.
It was the merest imperceptibility, perhaps, but it was there. The slightest shaking of her head, the profound, dead stillness of her eyes. "Shut up, you fool," they seemed to say. "Shut up, you stupid fool." The three of them, Morse, Lewis, Roop, sat together in interview room number 1. Lewis was seated by the door, whilst Morse and Roop sat opposite each other at the small table. Morse seemed supremely confident as he sat back on the wooden chair, his voice calm, almost pleasant. "Shall I go on?" "If you must. I've already told you what a fool you're making of yourself. We'll start at the point where you walked into the syndicate building at about 4:25 p.m. a week last Friday. The first person you saw was the caretaker, Noakes. It was soon clear to you that there was no one else in the downstairs offices at all. No one. You concocted some tale about having to leave some papers with Dr. Bartlett, and since he was out, you had the best reason in the world for trying to find one of the others and for looking into their offices. You looked into Quinn's, of course, and everything was just as you'd known it would be, as you'd planned it would be. Everything was cleverly arranged to give the clear impression to anyone going into his room that Quinn was there, in the office, or at least would be there again very soon. It was raining heavily all day Friday, a piece of good luck, and there on the back of Quinn's chair was his green anorak. Who would leave the office on a day like that without taking his coat? And the cabinets were left open, and there was a note for his secretary saying that he'd soon be back. Roop was watchful and tense, but he said nothing. The caretaker told you that he was going off for tea, and before long you were alone, or so you thought, on the ground floor of the syndicate building. Noakes, quite unwittingly, had given you some very interesting information. The only car left in the rear car park was Quinn's. Well, what happened then was this, or something very like it. You went into Quinn's room once more, you took his anorak, you put it on, then you saw that note and you pocketed it. Certainly Quinn wouldn't have left it on the desk if he'd returned. And from this point on, you had to think and act exactly as Quinn would have done. You walked out of the back door and found, as you knew you would, that Quinn's car keys were in his anorak pocket. No one was around, of course. The weather was still foul, though ideal for you. You got into the car and you drove away. Noakes, in fact, saw you leave, but he thought, why shouldn't he, that it was Quinn? Roop shuffled uneasily on his hard wooden chair. You drove the car to Kidlington and you parked it in Quinn's own garage in Pinewood Close. And here again you had a curious combination of good and bad luck. First, the good luck. The rain was still pouring down, and no one was likely to look too carefully at the man who got out of Quinn's car to unlock his own garage doors. It was dark, too, and the corner of Pinewood Close was even darker than usual because someone, Roop, had seen to it that the street lamp outside the house had been conveniently smashed. But in another way, the luck was very much against you. It so happened that a woman was standing at the upstairs front window. Now, this was not in itself a fatal occurrence. She'd seen you, of course, but it never occurred to her for a second that the person she saw was anyone but Quinn. And you yourself must have totted up the odds and worked on exactly that assumption. Nevertheless, she'd seen you go into the house, where you immediately discovered that Mrs. Evans had not finished the cleaning. She'd left a note to say she would be coming back. That was bad luck. All right, and yet you suddenly saw the chance of turning the tables completely. You read the note from Mrs. Evans, and you screwed it up and threw it into the waste paper basket. And then, the masterstroke. You had a note in your pocket. A note written by Quinn himself, a note which not only looked genuine, it was genuine. The note was addressed to Margaret Freeman, Quinn's confidential secretary, but not by name, by initials, M.F. You found a black, thin point biro in Quinn's anorak, and very carefully you changed the initials. Not too difficult, was it? A bit of a squiggle for R.S. after the M, and an additional bar at the bottom of the F, converting it into an E. Mrs. Evans. The message was good enough, vague enough anyway, to cover the deception. And then you went out again. You didn't want to take any risks, though, so you went via the back door, out into the back garden, through the gap in the fence, and over the path across the field to the Quality supermarket. You bought some provisions, and even as you walked round the shelves, your brain was working non-stop. Buy something that made it look as though Quinn was having someone in for a meal that evening. Another clever touch. 2 steaks and all the rest of it. But you shouldn't have bought the butter, Roop. You got the wrong brand. And he had plenty in the fridge anyway. Roop bestirred himself at last. You've not the slightest shred of evidence for any of these fantastic allegations you've made against me. Not the slightest. You deny the charges, then? Charges? What charges? I'm not aware that you've made any charges. You deny that the sequence of events... Of course I deny it! Why the hell should anyone go to all that trouble? Whoever murdered Quinn had to try to establish an alibi, and he did. A very clever alibi. All the indications in this case point to Quinn being alive on Friday evening, certainly until the very early evening, and it was vital. You mean Quinn wasn't alive on Friday evening? Oh, no, said Morse slowly. Quinn had been dead for several hours. There was a long silence in the small room, broken finally by Roop. Several hours, you say? Morse nodded. Roop's voice suddenly became high-pitched and exasperated. But I was in London that Friday, I told you that. I got back to Oxford at 4:15. 4:15, can't you believe that? No, I can't. For Christ's sake, show some sense. I was in London until 3 o'clock or so, and I was on the train until it reached Oxford. Don't you understand that? Make something up if you like, but please, please tell me when and how I'm supposed to have murdered the man. That's all I ask. As Lewis looked at him, Morse seemed to be growing a little less confident. I've only got your word, Mr. Roop, and it was Mr. Roop now, that you caught that particular train from London. You were at your publisher's, I know that, we've checked, but you could... May I use your phone, Inspector? Morse shrugged and looked vaguely disconsolate. It's a bit unusual, I suppose, but... Roop looked through the directory, rang a number, and spoke rapidly for a few minutes before handing the receiver to Morse. It was the cabriolet taxi services, and Morse listened and nodded and asked no questions. I see. Thank you. He put down the phone and looked across at Roop. You had more success than we did, Mr. Roop. I was worried. Who wouldn't be? We've all got an instinct for self-preservation, you know. Roop got to his feet. Can I assume I'm free to go now? Yes, sir, I'm sorry, but things like this... Before Morse could say more, Roop had left the room and was walking briskly across the courtyard in the bright and chilly afternoon. A strangely self-satisfied smile was spreading over Morse's face. He saw that Lewis was watching him, and he winked happily. The man inside the house is anxious, but reasonably calm. The phone rings stridently, imperiously, several times during the late afternoon and early evening, but he does not answer it, for he has seen the post office van repairing the telephone wires just along the road. They must think him stupid. Over and over again he tells himself that they can't know, can only guess, can never prove. Infernal phone. He waits until the importunate caller has exhausted a seemingly limitless patience, and takes the receiver off its stand, but it purrs intolerably. The man outside the house has been watching for over 3.5 hours, and his feet are damp and cold. He looks at his luminous watch. 5:40 p.m. Only another 20 minutes before his relief arrives. The man inside the house does not sleep that night. He's dressed again at 6 a.m. and he waits. It's not until 7:45 a.m. that the paper boy arrives with the Times. It is still dark, and the little business is speedily transacted, uncomplicated, unobserved. The man outside has almost given up hope, when at 1:15 p.m. the door opens, and a man emerges and walks unhurriedly down towards Oxford. The man outside speaks into his mobile radio. The reply is brief and curt. Follow him, Dixon, and don't let him see you. The man who had been inside the house walks to the railway station buffet, orders a cup of coffee, sits by the window, and looks out into the car park. At 1:35 a car drives slowly past, a familiar car, which turns down the incline into the car park and makes for the furthest corner. The man in the buffet puts down his half-finished coffee and walks out. In the syndicate building on Wednesday morning, Morse told Bartlett frankly about the virtual certainty of some criminal malpractice in the administration of the examinations. He mentioned specifically his suspicions about the leakage of question papers to Aljamara, and passed exhibit number 1 across the table. 3rd of March. Dear George, greetings to all at Oxford. Many thanks for your letter and for the summer examination package. All entry forms and fees should be ready for final dispatch to the syndicate by Friday the 20th, or at the very latest, I am told, by the 21st. Admin has improved here, though there's room for improvement still. Just give us all 2 or 3 more years and we'll really show you. Please don't let these wretched 16-plus proposals destroy your basic O and A pattern. Certainly this sort of change, if implemented immediately, would bring chaos. Sincerely yours. Bartlett frowned deeply as he read the letter, then opened his desk diary and consulted a few entries.
This is, a load of nonsense. You realise that, don't you? All entry forms had to be in by the 1st of March this year.
You mean the entry forms from Aljamara were already in when that letter was written?
Oh, yes. And there's this business of the summer examination package. They couldn't possibly have received that before early April. Half the question papers weren't printed until then. And there's something else wrong, isn't there, Inspector? The 20th of March isn't a Friday, not in my diary anyway. No, I don't think I'd build too much on this letter. I'm sure it can't be from one of our...
You don't recognise the signature?
Would anybody? It looks like a coil of barbed wire.
Just read down the right-hand side of the letter, sir. The last word on each line, if you see what I mean.
In a flat voice, the secretary read the words aloud. Your package ready Friday the 21st, room 3. Please destroy this immediately. Oh, I do see what you mean, Inspector, though I must say I'd never have spotted it myself. You mean you think that George Bland was
on the fiddle? Yes. I'm convinced that this letter told him exactly where and when he could collect the latest instalment of his money.
Bartlett took a deep breath and consulted his diary once more. You may just be onto something, I suppose. He wasn't in the office on Friday the 21st.
Can you get in touch with him, sir?
Of course, I sent him a telegram only last Wednesday about Quinn.
Did he reply?
Hasn't done yet.
Morse took the plunge. I think you ought to know that in my view the deaths of both Quinn and Ogleby are directly linked with Bland. I think that Bland was corrupt enough to compromise the integrity of this syndicate at every point if there was money in it for him. But I think there's someone here, too, who's in collaboration with Bland, and I've little doubt that Quinn found out who it was and got himself murdered for his trouble.
In the corridor outside, Lewis whispered briefly to Morse,
You were right, sir. It rang for 2 minutes. Noakes confirms it.
Excellent.
I think it's time to make a move then, Lewis. Car outside? Yes, sir. Do you want me with you? No. You get to the car. We'll be along in a minute.
He walked along the corridor, knocked quietly on the door, and entered. She was sitting at her desk, signing letters, but promptly took off her reading glasses, stood up, and smiled sweetly.
Bit early to take me for a drink, isn't it?
No chance, I'm afraid.
The car's outside. I think you'd better get your coat.
As he steps out of his front door at 9:30 a.m. the next day, Thursday the 4th of December, the man who has been inside is arrested by Sergeant Lewis and Constable Dixon of the Thames Valley Constabulary CID branch. He's charged with complicity in the murders of Nicholas Quinn and Philip Ogleby. Morse had his feet up on the desk, feeling more than slightly self-satisfied, when Lewis came in at 2:30 on Thursday afternoon.
You don't look too happy, Lewis. What's the trouble? I still don't understand what's happening.
Lewis!
I suppose you think I'm not very bright, sir.
Nothing of the sort. It was a very clever crime, Lewis. I was just a bit lucky here and there, that's all.
I suppose I missed the obvious clues, as usual. But they weren't obvious, my dear old friend.
He put his feet down and lit a cigarette.
Let me tell you what put me onto the track, shall I? First of all, I think the single most important fact in the whole case was Quinn's deafness. He was very, very deaf, but he was quite exceptionally proficient in the art of lip-reading, and I'm quite sure that because he could lip-read so brilliantly, Quinn discovered that one of his colleagues was crooked. You see, the real sin against the Holy Ghost for anyone in charge of public examinations is to divulge the contents of question papers beforehand, and Quinn discovered that one of his colleagues was doing precisely that. But, Lewis, I failed to take into account a much more obvious and a much more important implication of Quinn's being deaf. Lip reading's absolutely useless when you can't see the person who's talking. When someone stands behind you, say, or when someone in the corridor outside shouts and there's a bomb in the building. Do you see what I mean, Lewis? If someone knocked at Quinn's office door, he couldn't hear anything. But as soon as someone opened the door and said something, he was fine. All right. Remember this, then. Quinn couldn't hear what he didn't see.
Morse looked at the Thursday evening class with their hearing aids plugged into their ears. There were 8 of them, sitting in a single row in front of their teacher. And at the back of the room, Morse felt that he was watching a TV screen with the sound turned off. The teacher was talking, for her lips moved and she made the natural gestures of speech, but no sound. When Morse had managed to rid himself of the suspicion that he had suddenly been struck deaf, he watched the teacher's lips more closely, and tried as hard as he could to read the words. Occasionally one or other of the class would raise a hand and voice a silent question, and then the teacher would write up a word on the blackboard. Frequently, it appeared, the difficult words, the words that the class were puzzled by, began with P, or B, or M, and to a lesser extent with T, D, or N. Lip reading was clearly a most sophisticated skill. At the end of the class, Morse thanked the teacher for allowing him to observe, and spoke to her about Quinn. He'd been the star pupil, it seemed. Yes, he really had been very deaf indeed, but one wouldn't have guessed, unless, that is, one had experience of these things. A bell sounded throughout the building. It was 9 p.m., and time for everyone to leave the premises. "Would he have been able to hear that?" asked Morse. But the teacher had temporarily turned away to mark the register. The bell was still ringing. "Would Quinn have been able to hear that?" repeated Morse. But she still didn't hear him, and belatedly Morse guessed the truth. When finally she looked up again, he repeated his question once more. "Could Quinn hear the bell?" "Could Quinn hear them all, did you say?" "Hear the bell," mouthed Morse with ridiculous exaggeration. "Oh, the bell! Is it ringing? I'm afraid that none of us could ever hear that." Mrs. Seth made her way upstairs to the boardroom. She was the first of the syndics to arrive, and as she sat down her thoughts drifted back to the last time she had sat there, when she had recalled her father, when Roop had spoken, when Quinn had been appointed. The room was gradually filling up, and she acknowledged a few muted good mornings. A man was sitting next to Bartlett, but she didn't know him. Must be from the police. Pleasant-looking man, about her own age, mid to late 40s, going a bit thin on top. There was another man, too, probably another policeman, but he was standing, with a notebook in his hands. At 2 minutes past 10, when all except one of the chairs were occupied, Bartlett stood up and informed the assembly of the police suspicions. His own, too, that the integrity of their own foreign examinations had been irreparably impaired by the criminal behaviour of 1 or 2 people. That it was the view of Chief Inspector Morse, on my right, that the deaths of Quinn and Ogleby were directly connected with this matter. Mrs. Seth saw Bartlett turn towards Morse. She saw Morse nod slightly before slowly rising to his feet. "Ladies and gentlemen, I asked the Secretary to call this meeting because I thought it only proper that you should all know something about the police investigations into the deaths of Mr. Quinn and Mr. Ogleby, and I'm sure you will all be very glad to know that the case is now complete, or almost complete." The silence of the room was broken only by the rustle of paper as Lewis turned over a page in his notebook. "You will know, or most of you will, that last Monday one of your own colleagues, Mr. Christopher Roop, was detained in connection with Quinn's murder. You will know, too, I think, that he was released shortly afterwards. The evidence against him appeared to us insufficient to warrant further detention, and everything seemed to point to the fact that he had a perfectly valid alibi for the period of time on Friday the 21st of November, when in the view of the police Quinn must have been murdered. Yet I must tell you all here and now that without a shadow of a doubt Roop was the person responsible for selling the soul of the syndicate, certainly in Aljamara, and for all I know in several of your other overseas centres as well. And, ladies and gentlemen, in all this his principal lieutenant was your former colleague, Mr. George Bland. The whole thing was brought to light by the vigilance and integrity of one man, Nicholas Quinn. Now, Precisely when Quinn made this discovery we shall perhaps never know for certain, but I should guess it may have been at the reception given by the Aljamara officials, when the drink was flowing freely, when some of the guilty were less than discreet, and when Quinn read things on the lips of others so clearly that they might just as well have been shouted through a megaphone. And it was, I believe, as a direct result of Quinn's deeply disturbing discovery that he was murdered, to stop him talking, and so ensure that those guilty of betraying public confidence should continue to draw their rewards, very considerable rewards, no doubt, from their partners in crime abroad. Furthermore, I think that in addition to telling the guilty party of what he knew, or at least of what he strongly suspected, Quinn told someone else. That someone else was Philip Ogleby. Now, if Ogleby were in the racket himself, many of the things which were so puzzling about Quinn's murder would begin to sort themselves out. Of all Quinn's colleagues, Ogleby was the one person who had no alibi for the key period on Friday afternoon. He went back to the office after lunch, and he was there, or so he said, the rest of the afternoon. Now, whoever killed Quinn had to be in the office both in the latter part of the morning, and again between 4:30 and 5, and if any single person from the office was guilty of murdering Quinn, there was only one genuine suspect, Ogleby, the very man in whom Quinn had confided. One or two of the syndics stirred uneasily in their chairs, but Morse resumed, and the effect was that of a conductor tapping his baton on the rostrum. However, as I gradually began to understand exactly what had happened that Friday afternoon, I realized that Ogleby was entirely innocent of the murder of Nicholas Quinn. The fact of the matter is that Quinn was murdered not by one person, but by two. And precisely because Ogleby was in the office on the afternoon of Friday the 21st of November, he knew the identity of those two people, and because of this knowledge, he himself was murdered. Why Ogleby didn't confide his suspicions to me, I shall never really know. I think I can guess, but anyway, we can only be grateful that his murderer has been arrested and is now in custody at police headquarters. He has made a full statement. Morse pointed to the empty chair. That's where he usually sits, I believe. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, your own colleague, Christopher Roop. The inspector had just been talking about Studio 2 in Walton Street, but Mrs. Seth's mind was growing numb, and she had hardly been able to follow him. She turned her head as the door behind her opened, and heard a man's voice say quietly, "After you, Miss Height." Monica Height? Dear God, no, it couldn't be. She'd heard rumours, of course, but everyone must have heard rumours, but Monica was sitting in Roop's seat now. Roop's. Had Morse meant Roop and Monica? Two people, he'd said, but Morse was speaking again. "Miss Height, I interviewed you early on in the case, and you claimed you had spent the afternoon of Friday the 21st of November with Mr. Martin, is that correct?" "Yes." "And you said that you had spent the afternoon at your own house?" "Yes." "And subsequently you agreed that this was not the truth?" "Yes." "You said that in fact you had spent the afternoon with Mr. Martin at Studio 2 in Walton Street?" "Yes." "When I originally questioned you about this, I asked whether, apart from Mr. Martin, you had seen anyone you knew in the cinema. Do you remember?" "Yes, I remember." "And your answer was that you had not?" "Yes, I told you the truth." "I then asked you whether you had seen anyone you knew going into the cinema, did I not?" "Yes." "And you said no?" "Yes." "And you still stick by what you said?" "Yes." "Am I right, Miss Height, in saying that I could have asked you a different question? A question which might have had some vital bearing on the murder of Nicholas Quinn?" "Yes." "And that question would not have been who did you see going into the cinema, but who did you see coming out?" "Yes." "And you did see somebody?" "Yes." "Is that someone here in this room now?" "Yes." "Will you please indicate to us who that person is?" Monica Height lifted her arm and pointed. At first Mrs. Seth thought that the arm was pointing directly at Morse himself, but that couldn't be. And then she followed that accusing finger once more, and she couldn't believe what she saw. For Monica's finger was pointing directly at the secretary of the syndicate, Dr. Bartlett. "What really put you on to Bartlett, sir?" Morse sat back expansively in the black leather chair and told him,
We learned fairly early on in the case, Lewis, that there was some animosity between Bartlett and Roop, and I kept asking myself why. And very gradually the light dawned. There was no animosity at all, although there had to appear to be. The two of them were hand in glove over the Aljamara business, and whatever happened, they were anxious for the outside world never to have the slightest suspicion of any collusion between them. At first, their carefully nurtured antagonism was merely meant to serve as a cover for the crooked arrangements they made with the Emirate. But later on, when Quinn discovered the truth about them, the arrangement was ideal for the removal of Quinn. But why on earth did Bartlett, of all people, agree to... I know what you mean. I'm sure that in the normal course of events he would never have been tempted in the slightest to line his own pockets at the expense of the syndicate. But he has an only child, Richard, who's a schizophrenic. You discovered yourself, Lewis, that within the past 5 years Richard Bartlett has spent time in the most advanced and expensive psychiatric clinics in Europe. And this isn't for free, remember? It must have cost Bartlett thousands of pounds. I don't think he'd got that sort of money. Do you know exactly how Bartlett murdered Quinn, sir? You get your dose, pretty hefty dose of cyanide. Roop sees to that side of things. I should think that Bartlett called Quinn into his office and suggested a drink together. He knew that Quinn was very fond of sherry and told him to pour himself one, and probably one for Bartlett at the same time. But wouldn't Quinn have smelled the cyanide? Well, he might have done, in normal circumstances. But Bartlett had timed his actions almost to the second. Oh, the fire drill, you mean? Yes. Noakes had been instructed to set off the alarm at 12 noon precisely. But this is the point, Lewis. Quinn can't hear the alarm. It gives Bartlett just the little leeway he needs. As soon as Quinn has poured the sherries, and only when the time is exactly ripe, does he say something like, "The fire alarm. I'd forgotten about that. Toss that back quickly, we can talk afterwards." Quinn must have drained at least half the small glass at a gulp, and almost immediately he must have known that something was desperately wrong. In a minute, or at the outside, a couple of minutes, he was dead. Why didn't he shout for help, though? Surely... Ah! I see you still don't appreciate the infinite subtlety of Bartlett's plan. What's happening outside? A fire drill! As you yourself found out, Noakes had been instructed to let the alarm ring for 2 minutes. 2 minutes! That's a long, long time, Lewis. And during it, everybody is chattering and clattering down the stairs and along the corridors towards the front entrance. And remember, no one is going into Bartlett's office. The red light has been turned on outside, and none of the staff is going to disobey the golden rule. So Quinn is dead, and the building is now completely deserted. Bartlett puts on a pair of gloves, pours his own sherry and whatever is left of Quinn's down the sink in his private little cloakroom, remember it, Lewis? And locks away the sherry bottle and Quinn's glass in a briefcase. So far, so good. Quinn's a fairly slight man, and Bartlett then dragged him to the rear entrance, and Quinn's parking place was immediately outside the door. Bartlett, who had already taken Quinn's car key and house key from his pocket, dumps the body and the briefcase in the boot, locks it, and the deed is done. Then he goes out to join the rest of his staff, Lewis suggested. Morse nodded. He takes over the list, which by this time has been handed round the 30 or so permanent staff, ticks in himself and Quinn as present, and finally decides that all are accounted for. Then he went home and had a hearty lunch. Hearty? I doubt it, said Morse. Bartlett's a very clever man, but basically he's not as ruthless as someone like Roop. Anyway, he's still got a lot on his mind. Certainly the trickier half of the plan is over, but he hasn't finished yet. He must have left home again at about 1:10, telling his wife, perfectly correctly, that he had to call in at the office before going off to his meeting in Banbury. But before he did that, he called in at Studio 2? Yes. Bartlett bought a ticket, had it torn through, asked the usherette where the gents was, waited there a few minutes, and then nipped out when the girl in the ticket office was busy. But after that, things began to go awry. Not that Bartlett saw Monica Height, I'm pretty sure of that, but she saw him coming out of Studio 2. Bartlett then goes back to the syndicate, and he's got a ticket. But where is he to leave it? He could leave it in Quinn's room, because he's got to go in there anyway to leave the note for Margaret Freeman and to open the cabinets. From this point onwards, things had to be arranged to meet Roop's convenience, not Bartlett's. Roop has dutifully fixed himself up with a watertight alibi until late afternoon, but now he needs some plausible reason for visiting the syndicate. They've decided between them that the cinema ticket and Quinn's keys are to be left somewhere carefully concealed on Bartlett's desk, or in one of his drawers. Well,
What happened then? Roop knocks on Bartlett's door, gets no answer, goes in quickly, leaves his papers and picks up the ticket and the keys. Easy. Originally the plan must have been for him to hang around somewhere, probably by the trees at the back, until the rest of the graduate staff went home. Then he would only have to nip in the back entrance, pick up the anorak from Quinn's office, and drive off in Quinn's car. But in fact it was easier than he could have hoped. Noakes was able to confirm that none of the graduate staff was in his office that afternoon. And when he told Roop that he was off upstairs for a cup of tea, the coast was clear, half an hour or so earlier than he'd expected it to be. And from then on, it must have gone very much as you said before. Except for one thing. I suggested to Roop when we first brought him in that he'd pocketed the note from Quinn's desk, but I don't think he could have done. Otherwise I can think of no earthly reason why he had to phone Bartlett when he discovered that Mrs. Evans was going to return. That was the conversation Mrs. Greenaway overheard. He couldn't just dump the body and run for it. Mrs. Greenaway, he must have seen her, was sitting in full view in the room upstairs with the curtains open, and there was only one way for Quinn's body to be carted out. That was by the front door of the garage. There was nothing to do but to wait. But he couldn't wait there. He must have been feeling desperate when he rang up Bartlett. But Bartlett came up with the masterstroke, the note on Quinn's desk. Bartlett had only just got back from Banbury, but he drove off again almost immediately, called in at the syndicate for the note, and met Roop as arranged at the shopping area behind Pinewood Close, where Roop had already bought the groceries. Roop got back to Quinn's, took off his muddy boots, left the note, and went out again. He must have got wet through, but imagine his immense relief as he watched and waited first to see Mrs. Evans come and go, and then, almost miraculously, an ambulance drew up and took Mrs. Greenaway off to the maternity hospital. The house was in darkness then. No one was about. The street lamp was broken. He carries Quinn's body to the back door and into the house, puts it on the carpet by the chair in the living room, arranges the sherry bottle and the glass on the coffee table, lights the fire, and Bob's your uncle. But what about Ogleby? Where does he fit in? Well, as I've told you, Lewis, a good deal of what Ogleby told us was true. And I think he was virtually certain that Bartlett had killed Quinn long before I ever... Ogleby must have been a clever fella, sir. Oh, I don't know. Remember, he had a couple of leagues start on me. How do you mean, sir? How many times do I have to tell you? He was in the office that afternoon. Must have been upstairs then, because... No, that's where you're wrong. He must have been downstairs. He must have realized when he finally got back from lunch that he was the only one of the graduates in the office, and that this was as good a chance as he was going to get to poke around in Bartlett's room. Whether Quinn had told him that he suspected Bartlett and Roop, or just Bartlett, we can't know for certain. But he decides to do a bit of investigation. At about 4:30 he hears voices outside, Roop's and Noakes's, and he doesn't want to get caught. Where's the obvious place for him to hide? In the small cloakroom, just behind Bartlett's desk. He just stands inside and waits. And he doesn't have to wait long. But what does Ogleby find when he emerges from the cloakroom? He discovers that the cinema ticket and the keys which he'd found earlier have gone. When he finally satisfies himself that it's safe to come out, the first thing he notices is that Quinn's car has gone. Perhaps he looks into Quinn's room, I don't know. Has Quinn come in and gone out again? I don't know how much of the truth he suspected at that point. Not much, perhaps, but he knows that Roop has taken some keys and a mysterious cinema ticket, a ticket which he has carefully copied into his diary. In cell number 2, the little secretary sat on the bare bed, his mind like Yeats's long-legged fly floating on silence. The syndicate building had been locked up and all the staff instructed to stay away until further notice. Only Noakes was on hand to let the 2 policemen in. Seated at Bartlett's desk, Morse amused himself by switching the red and green lights on and off. It was clear to Lewis that, as usual, he would have to do the donkey work. It was over half an hour later, after Lewis had methodically gone through the safe and found nothing of interest, that Morse finally condescended to bestir himself. The top right-hand drawer of Bartlett's desk had little to offer but neatly stacked piles of office notepaper, and Morse abstracted a sheet and surveyed the decimated graduate team. T.G. Bartlett, Ph.D., M.A., Secretary. P. Ogleby, M.A., Deputy Secretary. G. Bland, M.A., Miss M.M. Height, M.A., D.J. Martin, B.A. The typists had been instructed to strike through Bland's name and print in Quinn's at the bottom. That wouldn't be necessary any longer. Just strike through the top 3 much quicker. And then there were 2. Morse took out his Parker pen and slowly crossed through the names. Dr. Bartlett, Philip Ogleby, George Bland. Yes, just the 2 of them left. And now they could fornicate for a few months to their heart's content. A few months. That's all Quinn had been there, not even long enough to get his name printed on the notepaper. Nicholas Quinn. Morse thought back to the lip-reading class he'd attended. Would Quinn have been able to cope? No, perhaps not. Lip-reading might be a wonderful thing, but even the teacher of the class had made a mistake, hadn't she, when he'd asked her... Morse froze where he sat, and the blood seemed to surge away from his arms and from his shoulders, leaving the top of his body numbed and tingling. Oh, God, no, surely not. Oh, Christ! His hand was shaking as he wrote out the 2 names on the notepaper. Lewis, go and stand over by the door and take this notepaper with you. A puzzled Lewis did exactly as he was told. I want you to read those 2 names to me, just using your lips. Don't even whisper them, just mouth them, if you know what I mean. Lewis did his best. Again, said Morse, and Lewis complied. And again. And again. And again. And again. Morse nodded and nodded and nodded and nodded, and there was a vibrant excitement in his voice as he spoke again. Get your coat, Lewis. We've finished here. She would say nothing at all for a start, but Morse was merciless. Did you clean the blood off? My God, you must be blind if you can't see what's been happening. How many other women has he had? Who was he with last night? Don't you know? Have you never suspected? Did you clean the blood off, did you? Or did he? Don't you understand? I've got to know. Did you clean it off? I've got to know. Suddenly she broke down completely and burst into bitter hysterical tears. He said there'd been an accident, and he said he'd tried to help until the ambulance... The door opened and a man came in. What the hell? His voice had the lash of a whip, and his eyes shone with a primitive blazing madness. What's that bloody man Roop been telling you snooping bastard? He advanced on Morse and lashed out wildly, whilst Mrs. Martin rushed from the room with a piercing scream. In Morse's office the next morning, it was Lewis's turn to grin. Must be a bit tricky talking, sir, with all those stitches around your mouth. Well, tell me then. What? What finally put you on to Martin? Well, I told you the key to this case lay in the fact that Quinn was deaf, and so it was. But I overlooked the most obvious thing of all, that even the best lip reader in the world is sometimes going to make mistakes, and Quinn did just that. He saw Roop talking to the sheik, and he read a name wrongly on his lips. The commonest difficulty for the deaf is between the consonants P and B and M, and if you mouth the words Bartlett and Martin, there's very little difference on the lips. The B and the M are absolutely identical, and the second part of each of the names gets swallowed up in the mouth somewhere. And that's not all. It was Dr. Bartlett and Donald Martin. Just try them again. Very little difference, you see. And if you put the 2 names together, there's every excuse for a deaf person mixing them up. You see, Roop would never have called the secretary Tom, would he? He'd have called him Dr. Bartlett. And the sheik would certainly have given him his full title. But Martin, well, he was one of the boys. He was Donald Martin. Bit of a jump in the dark, if you ask me. No, it wasn't, not really. There were 1 or 2 loose ends that somehow refused to tuck themselves away, and I had an uneasy feeling that I might have got it all wrong. Just think. Quinn discovered, or so he believed, that Bartlett was crooked, and he rang him up. Rang him up, Lewis. You can guess how Quinn dreaded ringing anyone up. The fact of the matter was that he couldn't face Bartlett with it in any other way, because he just couldn't believe that he was guilty. Did Quinn tell Bartlett that he suspected Roop as well? I should think so. Quinn must have been a man remarkably free of any deception, and he probably told both Bartlett and Roop everything he suspected. But why didn't Bartlett do something about it? He must have thought that Quinn had got everything cockeyed, mustn't he?
Quinn was accusing him, the secretary, of swindling the syndicate, and if Quinn was totally wrong about himself, why should he think that Quinn was right about Roop? Lewis shook his head slowly. All a bit thin, if you ask me, sir. In itself, yes. But let's turn to Monica Height. It's fairly easy now to see why Martin must have been happy to agree to the lies they cooked up together after Monica told him that she'd seen Bartlett coming out of the cinema. In fact, I should think that he'd almost instigated them himself, because it was going to suit his book very well not to have himself associated with Studio 2 in any way. And later, after Monica learned that Quinn himself might have been in Studio 2 that same afternoon, she immediately realized that things would look pretty black for Bartlett if she said anything about seeing him there, and so she continued to conceal the truth. Why, Lewis? For the very same reason that Quinn couldn't face Bartlett, because she just couldn't believe that he was guilty. Lewis nodded. Perhaps it was all adding up slightly better now. And above all, continued Morse, there was Ogilby. He worried me the most, Lewis, and you made the key point yourself. Why didn't he tell me what he knew? He'd discovered what looked like extremely damning evidence against Bartlett, a man he'd known and worked with for 14 years, and he just couldn't believe that he was guilty. And he was determined to say nothing which could lead us to suspect him, not until he could prove it anyway. But he didn't get the chance. No, said Morse quietly. He leaned back in his chair and gently rubbed his swollen lip. It was Martin, then, who did all of the things you accused Bartlett of. Indeed it was. And more. Martin killed Quinn at exactly the same time and in almost exactly the same way. The deed was done in Martin's office, and Martin had exactly the same opportunity as Bartlett would have had. Admittedly, he was taking a slightly bigger risk, but he'd planned the whole thing, at least up to this point, with meticulous care. On the whole, they made the best of the opportunities that arose, but they tried to be a bit too clever, especially about the Studio 2 business, which landed them both in a lot of unnecessary trouble. Don't get cross with me, sir, but can you just go over that again? I don't think Studio 2 figured in the original plan at all, although I may be wrong, of course. The original idea must have been to try to persuade any caller at Quinn's office that he was there or thereabouts during that Friday afternoon. It was all a bit clumsy, but just about passable. The note to his typist, the anorak, the filing cabinet, and so on. Now, I'd guess that Martin's nerves must have been pretty near breaking point after he'd killed Quinn, and he must have breathed a huge sigh of relief when he managed to persuade Monica to spend the afternoon with him. The fewer people in the office that afternoon, the better, and being with Monica gave him a reasonable alibi if things didn't go according to plan. As I say, I don't think that at this stage there was the remotest intention of planting the torn half of a cinema ticket on Quinn's body. But remember what happened. Martin and Monica decided to lie about going to the cinema, and Martin himself gradually began to take stock of the situation. He must have realized that the elaborate attempts to convince everyone that Quinn was alive and well at the syndicate were pretty futile. No one's there to be convinced. Bartlett's not there, he knows that. He himself and Monica are not there either. Quinn's dead, and Ogilby is out lunching with the OUP people, and may not go back to the office at all. So, he gets his brainwave. He'll get Roop to put the cinema ticket in one of Quinn's pockets. But when... Just a minute. After leaving the cinema, they went their separate ways. Monica went home, so did Martin, except that on his way he called in at the syndicate at about 3:20. Found no one about, not even Ogilby, and left his own cinema ticket in Bartlett's room for Roop to pick up. But Roop wouldn't have known... Give me a chance, Lewis. Martin must have written a very brief note, stick this in his pocket or something like that, and put it with the ticket and the keys. Then, about 10 minutes later, Ogilby got back, found everyone else out, and decided that this was as good an opportunity as he'd get of poking around in Bartlett's room, and he was so puzzled by what he found there that he copied out the cinema ticket into his diary. And Martin went home, I suppose? Morse nodded, and made sure, I should think, that somebody saw him, especially during the vital period between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, when he knew that Roop was performing his part of the crime. He must have thought he could relax a bit, but then Roop rang him up from Quinn's house at just after 5 o'clock, with the shattering news that Quinn's charlady... Well, you know the rest. What about the paper boy? Did Roop send him with a letter to Bartlett just to make things difficult for Bartlett? Yes. Roop must have said he wanted to have an urgent talk with him about police suspicions, or something like that,
Roop knew, of course, that we were watching him like a hawk, and so he walked slowly down to the railway station and let us follow him. You haven't talked to Bartlett about that? Not yet, but after we'd let him go, I thought we ought to give him a bit of a breather, poor fellow. He's had a rough time. Lewis hesitated. There is just one more thing, sir. Yes? Bartlett will have something to explain away, won't he? I mean, he did go to Studio 2. Morse smiled as widely as his swollen mouth would allow him. Bartlett's as human as the rest of us, and perhaps it's a long time since he's seen the likes of Inga Nielsen unbuttoning her blouse. The film started at 1:30, and since he didn't need to leave for Banbury until about 2:30, he decided to be a dirty old man for an hour or so. He must have gone in immediately the doors opened, sat there in the rear lounge, and then, as his eyes accustomed themselves to the darkness, he saw Martin come in. But Martin didn't see him, and Bartlett did what anybody in his position would do. He got out, quick. And that's when Monica saw him. That's it. So he didn't see the film after all. Morse shook his head sadly. And if you've got any more questions, leave until tomorrow. I've got a treat for you tonight. But I promised the wife. Morse pushed the phone over. Tell her you'll be a bit late. They sat side by side in a fairly crowded gathering, with only the green exit lights shining brightly in the gloom. Morse had bought the tickets himself, rear lounge. After all, it was something of a celebration. Christ, look at those, whispered Morse as the camera moved in on the buxom blonde beauty, her breasts almost toppling out over the low-cut, closely clinging gown. Take it off, shouted a voice from somewhere near the front, and the predominantly male audience sniggered sympathetically, whilst Morse settled himself comfortably in his seat and prepared to gratify his baser instincts. And with only token reluctance, Lewis prepared to do the same.